Okay. Shall we start? Everybody is ready? Okay. Okay. So this time Pranav is joining us. So Arnesh and Pranav will be taking this workshop.
Yeah.
And welcome both of you. Stage is yours.
Hi, my name is Pranav. I'm also going to senior year, but I don't go to Irvington anymore. And
my name is Arnesh Kumar. So I'm just going to recap my introduction. So I'm also going to be an incoming senior at Irvington High School, and I live in Fremont, California.
yeah. So the emphasis for today will be like just to go over things we went last time in, for like about 1/4 of the time, because I feel like that's the building blocks of just programming in general. And then we'll move into like new concepts, and 2 new concepts for lists and functions. And then after that, we have like 3 challenge projects that we'll work on. So, okay, just to review, what is programming and what is Python? Programming is a way to communicate with the computer just like you communicate with your friends. And in programming, there's different languages that we use just like you can communicate with your friends using different languages. And one of them happens to be Python. It's a leading language right now in industry, and it's relatively straightforward and intuitive, that's why. So there's no sarcasm allowed in programming. You have to be as explicit as possible because of the fact that it's a computer, not a human being. All right, that's pretty much the introduction. So I want to start with comments, just because I usually like to start with a comment on the top of my file just to keep stuff organized, and that's basically with like a hashtag. And then what I like to do, and I'd encourage you to do it as well, is just start by writing your name, and after that in the next line just start by typing out what the purpose of the program is.
So we're going to be following this format for our 3 projects we're going to do sometime around the last hour, but I want you guys to format it something like this. So name, and you can type the rest.
And then the next line, I just like to add a comment on what we're going to be doing. This is not too like necessary right now because like we're just going all over the place, but I'll just do it just in case. We'll just say printing and user input, for example. I'll just say printing. That's fine. Again, this is optional. The program will run perfectly fine without it. In fact, it's going to ignore it, but it's just for being organized. Okay. So the first topic is review from last time is printing and user input in Python. And let's just start by like playing around with some print statements. It's quite simple. All you gotta do is just start with the word print. And the part of Python that's intuitive is that it's just literally print, and that's like the function that you gotta call. And then if you were doing like C++ or something like that, you would have complicated other things to worry about, but let's not worry about that here. It's just print, and then you have a set of parentheses, and inside the parentheses goes what's going to be printed. So here I'll just say the traditional hello world. If you're bored by this, just kind of sit through it right now because we have to review. Okay, so it's right here. Okay, so let's just do some more examples. For example, if I can say print sorry, I'm not used to typing on this computer. So notice here that it goes on a separate line, which you might take for granted because like you're just used to it because it's on 2 separate lines in our program, so like it has to be on 2 separate lines. But the thing is, it's not always the case. In other programming languages, like Java, for example, you have to specify that you want it to go to the next line. And I feel like that's a little bit better because it's a little bit more like, you have more control, but there's other ways that we'll cover later on where you can go to like, you can specify to not go to the next line. So we'll not worry about that right now, but that's gonna be in the future. But just for now, since we have 2 print statements in 2 separate lines, we have 2 outputs in 2 separate lines. As simple as that. Hey, let's do like a fun thing now. Let's print out a triangle, a right triangle. Try to do that first, and then we'll do it. So just try to do it first.
And one thing I want to point out is we have quotation marks. Remember when we went over primitive types, all the variables we create, if you want to create a string, you have to make sure you put in quotation marks. Now, if you want to print numbers on this case, we actually don't need quotation marks. So quotation marks essentially means we're treating this as a string. And here we see strings are words. So we have hello, I like to learn Python. That is a string. So here, this also works. So let's try running this. And then we can go into building a right triangle. We see output still works here. So 5, we don't need a quotation mark for numbers. So that's one more thing I want to point out, which I forgot to mention last week.
Okay, so I hope you guys are working on your right triangle program. It's just really easy. Don't overcomplicate it. When you're ready, I'll just.
If you guys need any help, don't forget to raise your hands.
The right triangle is supposed to look like this, like in this shape, but it starts like this. Basically, where the 90-degree angle is on the right, bottom right corner. However, if you want to orient it differently, that's fine as well. Should we start with the? If you need more time, just wait. You can make the height like as much as you want, but like honestly, I'm just gonna, due to time reasons, just make it like 3 long. That's it. So you can go ahead and save and run.
So you can hit Control S instead of having to do file save. That's just a quick way you can save your files. Wait.
ಗ್ಯಾಪ್ ಹಾಕೊಂಡು ಒಂದು ಎರಡು ಗ್ಯಾಪ್ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ನೋಡ್ತಾ ಒಂದು ಇದೀಗ ಎರಡು ಗ್ಯಾಪ್ ಹಾಕೊಂಡು
Oh yeah, there it is. Okay.
There it is. That's the nice triangle. It's just a practice. It's not really that complicated. All right. Any questions?
Yeah.
It says I have DLL while scanning screen.
Oh, okay. So,
how do I take out the hashtag?
all right. So you have equal now. So the line here is saying line 1.
ಇದು ತೋರಿಸ್ಬೇಡ ನಾನೇ
Wait, why is it saying? Because this usually happens when you don't have matching parentheses, right? You have this matching parentheses and this matching parentheses. So I don't see why you're getting that here. We try retyping that for you. So, alright. You have also matching quotation marks. So this is kind of like how it's formatted. Let's try writing it and see. Oh, what? What's getting there? Why is that happening? For some reason. Yeah, I mean it should be first similarly.
got it. I ಗೊತ್ತಾಯ್ತು ಇದಕ್ಕೆ ಒಂದು ಸ್ಪೇಸ್ ಎರಡು ಸ್ಪೇಸ್ ಮೂರು ಸ್ಪೇಸ್ ನಾನು ಫ್ಲಾಶ್ ಕೊಟ್ಟೆ ವರ್ಕ್ ಆಗಿಲ್ಲ
That's why I was orienting it in this way.
Yeah.
ಏನಿದೆ ನೋಡಿ
We can, we actually didn't cover that, we'll cover it.
It's what you have to do to fix it.
Yeah, and we'll go over that later on, but for now, we're doing it that way.
ಸ್ಪೇಸ್ ಕೊಡ್ಬೋದು
That's why
Yeah, so we can just do like that.
ಈಸಿ ಅದಾಗೆ ಬಂದ್ಬಿಡುತ್ತಲ್ಲ ಅದರಲ್ಲೆಲ್ಲ ನಾವು ಕೋಲನ್ ಹಾಕ್ಬೇಕು
Yeah, there it is. Perfect. Yeah, we'll go over that, clarify that too.
actually
Yeah, so you can just wait.
okay now
Okay. Sure, you're all good, right?
ಇಲ್ಲ ಇವಾಗ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ಸ್ಪೇಸ್
Okay. Now, speaking of, he had a question, and the question was that the triangle was oriented for him in the opposite way, so like a mirror image. And the problem with doing that is fine, but you have to use the backslash, and the backslash is used for escape characters. And so if you do like a backslash double quotations, it's going to think that you want to input a double quotation, and then there's no ending. Wait, what? Yeah. So let's get started with the discussion of escape sequences or characters. It's basically used to input a character which would otherwise be difficult to input, using the backslash and then whichever character you want. So let me go ahead and expand that with an example. So
ಸ್ಪೇಸ್ ಕೊಡೋಂಗಿಲ್ಲ
let's say that I wanted to do this triangle but oriented in the other direction. What I could do is I could do this and then backslash. But you see it's automatically getting you an error. The reason why is because it treats this as an escape character, and so it's going to input the double quotation. But that's not what we want to do. We want to end, right? So how do we do this? Well, there's an escape character for the backslash itself, and that's escape character is just going to be add another backslash right after. This way, what's going to happen is it's going to first start here. It's going to print this vertical bar, and then it's going to print this. It's not going to print two backslashes. It's going to only print one backslash, and then we end the string with this last double quotation. Another example is if you wanted to insert a tab I think is 4 or 5 spaces. Instead of adding 4 or 5 spaces, you could just add a backslash T, which is a tab. So you can do print, and then it has to be within double quotations, backslash T. This is just going to insert a tab, and then after that I can just say I inserted a tab. Okay, and then save, and then here it is. So this was what we had up here, and then after that we have a tab, which is approximately I think 4 or 5 spaces, and then I inserted a tab to down up there. Any questions? A backslash? Oh, that. Is this one? Yeah, that's it. Yeah. If you want to do the vertical bar, shift and then that.
There's also a few more escape characters. So we went over the backslash, which essentially means backslash here. There's also 2 more I'm going to be noting down. So if you wanted to give a new line, right? If you want to print out something and give a new line between 2 texts, we do backslash n, which basically means, hey, I want to give a new line between these 2 texts. So we can actually do that all in one print statement. So I'm just going to say hello and world, right? But say if I wanted to give hello and a new line and then say world, that's where we have backslash n. So this is one more escape sequence we have. So we say hello, this backslash n means give a new line, and we have world. So if I save and run this, see it's going to give hello, this backslash n means give a new line and world. So there's also one more escape sequence. It's for the quotation marks. So let me just also go over that real quickly. So if you want to give a quotation marks in a print statement, right? Now if we did this, right? If I did this, so if I say something like this, right? If I wanted to give a quotation mark in between these, I can't really do that, right? See, we need to make sure we have these matching quotation marks in our print statement. So the way to work around that is with that backslash quotation mark. So that's another escape character we're going over. And note that all our escape characters start with backslash and what we want to specify after that. So backslash quotation mark. And you see how our problem fixed. So let me just run this. See here, it's going to output the quotation mark. So those are a few of the escape sequences that are commonly used in our Python programs. So that's just one important thing I also want to point out.
Yeah. So yeah, those are like the 4 main ones that you will be using most frequently. So I'm just going to actually make that into a comment because it's quite important. Although there are alternatives, you don't have to use it, but it's quite nice. So there's the backslash n, there's the backslash t, and this is the new line. This is a tab, and then there's the backslash, which is not always necessary, but is necessary whenever we have a situation like this. And then after that we have the backslash t, or not the
Backslash quotation.
yeah, backslash.
But almost the colon
Okay. You got it? All right. That's good. So let's move into data analysis, storing data, and working with data, because that's very important. So for example, let's say that I had a program that I wanted to work with, where I wanted to store my age, and then print out 10 years younger, because I want to be 10 years younger. So let's do that. Now the special thing about this is that about Python, is that you don't have to specify the data type before you create the variable, because it's dynamic in the sense that it's going to automatically determine the data type, and it's gonna create it in memory accordingly. Strings, which are basically characters joined together, are going to require more memory. So, but we don't have to worry about that because it's Python and it's intuitive. It's just automatically going to do it for us. So, say age. Now, what's age going to be? Int, string, character?
Int, yeah.
That's right. So it can be an int. If you want to be specific, you can do like 12.54, but no one does that. So let's just say int age equals 19, for example. Okay. Now, what we wanted to do was we wanted to take age and we wanted to subtract 10 from it and then print it out. So what do you suggest I do now? Yeah, you can do it. That's good. Or I was going towards like actually updating the variable itself. So that's good. We'll just do that for sure. So print and then age minus 10. That's an easy way to do it. And then okay. So there you go. 19 minus 10 is 9. Similarly, if we wanted to subtract age by 10 and store it back into age, that's basically going to be done like this. Age equals age minus 10. Which is, what it's going to do is, it's going to take age, which is 19, subtract it by 10, which is going to give it 9, and then store it back into age, and then we don't really need this minus 10 again because we don't have the negative age. So then it's just going to be 9 once again.
So just a quick review. Do you guys remember the term we used for the line 6, age equals age minus 10? So do you guys remember the term we used? No, like the concept. So we had two operators, right? When we want to add a value to a variable, we also had subtracting a value from a variable, right? So we have increment and, yeah, so that's the concept we're covering here too. We're basically subtracting the value of 10 from this variable called age. So age minus 10, we're assigning that value to this variable called age. So, and we're basically printing out that value.
Yeah, that's right. So it's kind of weird because like in math, you don't do this kind of thing where like age equals age minus 10 because that doesn't make sense in math. But in in programming, this is done like across different languages. It's just, this is evaluated first, and then this is going to be stored in age after the evaluation. So it's like an assignment operator. So it's going to assign it to the variable once it gets updated, or once the expression is valued. So then, yeah, this is going to work exactly like before. And it's 9 once again. All right. Questions? Okay. Let's go. So let's go ahead and take what we've learned with strings and with ints, and let's combine them together and print something such as, my name is Pranav and I am something years old, right? So let's do that. So my age is not 19, but let's just go with it. And then name is Pranav. And then what we can do is we have to print, my name is Pranav and my age is 19. There's a couple of ways to do it. Let me do it in one way, and then I'll do it in another way that's a little better. So I can do this, and I can go to the next line and print my age. So what do you think is going to happen, first of all? What do you think is going to happen? Yeah, let's go to the next slide, right?
Yeah.
So, see.
Let's see the output.
So it says, my name is Pranav and I am 19. This is awkward. So what can we do here? We have to make it all into one line. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Concatenation. That's the idea. So I can remove this, or I can just comment it out.
But the thing here is, what are we concatenating? So we're concatenating strings to what? Yeah, so recall in our last lecture, we couldn't concatenate strings to int. So the workaround that is casting type. So in this case, we can cast this int variable to a string variable.
Yeah, before we do that, let's just try to do it without casting and see what it tells us.
Yeah, so let's try running it without casting value. So plus
Another,
8.
yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So plus, which means I'm joining this with whatever comes on the right side.
Yeah.
So plus sign, as you recall, has two uses. It can concatenate or join together two things, or it can basically add values together. But in this case, we're doing concatenation. So go ahead.
So if you were to have only two integers or like double, something like that, numbers essentially, it would add. But then this plus, since there's a string before it, or if there's a string after it, it's going to do concatenation. Whenever string's involved, it's concatenation. So that's kind of a way that Python and other programming languages look at this. So if I just do, without doing casting, type casting, I can just do age, and it shouldn't work. So yeah, this is type error, and then can only concatenate str to string, not int to string. So strings and ints cannot be concatenated together because they are different types. And so the way you work around this is, there's two ways. You could obviously store this in a string, but we don't want to do that. Because when I change this, I can change it. I don't want to change it within a string. So I can just make this str, and then that. Okay. And then where's the run button?
Actually,
Alright.
yeah, stop this and then rerun it.
That's better, right? That should be better. So that's just that. Any questions with that? Good. I'll make this shade available that I keep referring to because it's like very nice and organized, and I feel like it's good for time efficiency and just efficiency in general. So I'll make this like available via like wherever, email, Drive. Right. So if you don't have any questions, we can move on to user input. So far what we've been doing is we've been creating variables and then assigning them values, but like that's us doing the programming and us like determining the values. That's not good. So we can actually allow the user to input the values and based on that produce outputs, which is what user input is all about. User input in Python is so much easier, so be grateful you're learning Python. Because if you're learning it in like Java, for example, it's so much more complicated. You have to import stuff, and then you have to like specify which type it's going to be, and there's different methods for that, but you don't have to worry about that here. So I'll go over like an example. This is a very good example because it's going to teach you a bunch of things at once. So let's say that I had x as our typical nice variable, and I wanted to allow the user to input a value to x. How do you, why is it capital? Well, that is how it is. How do you do that? Do you remember? Did you cover this last time?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. How do you do that if you remember? Okay, so we'll go over it, it's fine. Okay, so if you just do input, it's as intuitive as it can be, input, and then you do a set of parentheses after it. This is it. This is going to allow you to input values. So if we go ahead and do save, and sorry.
Well, let's run it and see what's like. You see, this is kind of like a poor design. So how I usually create my input statements is inside these parentheses, I can specify what the user exactly has to input. So if you remember this from last week, we could do something like input and in quotation marks, enter your name. So it's going to basically output that to a terminal, and we have to type out something with the given information. So a better design is to actually specify what the user exactly has to input.
Yeah, so basically inside of the set of parentheses, in the string, you just have to specify enter a number for x or something like that. I'll just do enter first number. And that's good. That's gonna, let me actually, so here it's less like ambiguous, if that's the right word. It's gonna basically tell you to enter the first number, and then it has like this kind of like a box where you can enter a number. So let's just say 96, and then nothing happens, but that's fine. That's all we asked the program to do, so it's gonna do that. Next, we'll create another, and actually I'm gonna specify there's a space here. This is for readability purposes.
What I would do is usually create my programs with a colon and give a space.
Oh yeah, you can do that.
You can do that if you want.
It's
it just makes it more readable, yeah.
And that's it. So let's just go ahead and add that colon for readability and stuff. Next, we'll create another variable, and y is a good option. So input, and then enter second number. That's pretty good. So what's gonna happen? It's gonna go to the first line, enter first number, enter a number. You can add a space before it, it's not gonna make a difference. And then 2, for example, and then next number 3, and then enter, goes to the next line, and then that's it. I'm not gonna run it because there's no point. We already know it's gonna happen. So then what we can do now is we can create another variable z, xyz, and we can add the two numbers x plus y and store it into z. So I should do that, x plus y. Now I know I've been taking this for granted, but again, a computer doesn't take things for granted. But here it does. If you go ahead and add a bunch of spaces, nothing's gonna happen. Like spaces in between the x and the plus, and then the plus and the y. It doesn't do anything. And I think I just do it because it's better to read. So that's just why I do it.
Alright, so let's actually print out z in this case. So what do you think we would need to do to print out z in this case? Or the value of z, I should say. Anyone know? Yeah? Yeah, but do we need quotation marks? No, right? So do print and z. So print
Our code is running, but we'll just ignore that. So print
z.
There you go.
Let's stop and there you go. You're stopping.
Enter first number, is, let's see, 34. Enter second number, 35. And then look at this. This is what I wanted you to see. So the interesting thing about this is that the input is automatically going to accept everything as a string. It's not going to accept it as an int, although that's the most intuitive thing to do. It's going to accept it as a string. So what do we do about this? Any suggestions?
Yeah.
Instead of putting input or you can make it int.
Yep. So say int for the input. But make sure you put parentheses here and parentheses here.
Okay, that's one way. But I was actually not going for that immediately. That you kind of went like one step ahead. Before that, actually, just for kind of going slow, I'll remove this for now, and I'll just do the obvious thing that others would have said, and I'll create a new variable, and I'll call that a, and that's going to be int x. So we're casting x to an int. And this is, and then we'll do that for y. I'll continue. So for y, we'll just create a variable b int y, and then z equals not x plus y because that's not going to do anything good. So we can do a plus b, and then yeah, this should work. This should work. So 34, 35. That's it. Okay. So, all right. Then we can go back to what she said and add like an int around this thing, which is also good. That's the second step. So we don't need to create a new variable and complicate stuff.
So when you do it this way, you can save up lines rather than creating a different variable. You just say int and in parentheses input and whatever is in that parentheses. So int.
Right, and change this to x plus y. Enter first number 3, enter second number 6, 9. Okay, that's good. So it works great. This is honestly all that you need really for this topic, but there's another thing I want to go into, and this, if you don't get this immediately, that's fine, but you probably will, so this should be good. So let's go ahead and actually, should we do it? I don't think we'll come back to it if we need to. I was going to do something else, but we'll come back to it if we need to.
Okay, one thing, there was actually like one confusion last week. So remember how last time I showed like instead of int we could do bool, right? So let's actually replace this with bool. Let me get rid of, wait, everyone has this, right? Alright, so let me replace this with bool. And let me get rid of this y statement. And let me just say, for example, just do input. We don't, just say enter Boolean value, for example. But notice if I do print out x, right? If I do print out x, let's try typing in false, all right? And let's see what happens. So if I type in Boolean value false, we see it's gonna get true. So essentially when you do bool, and if a user types in anything, it doesn't matter what they type. You can type in true or false, it is always gonna be true. If the user, however, inputs nothing, so you can input an empty string, they don't enter anything, then that's the only case where this will be equated to false. So now let me just run this again, and let's just hit enter. Let's not type anything. Let's go here and hit enter. You see here it's going to be false, right? So this is one thing I wanted to also point out. It was also kind of a confusion last week, so I'll just make sure to clear that confusion. So to review, anything typed in is true. Nothing typed in is false when we're doing it in this case. So let me just
That's good. Okay, since he already covered it, let's actually go over the next topic that I was going to cover. And in this case, we're going to go into characters. So how do we work with characters? So let me delete all of this. Again, we'll start with some variable at C, because C for character, and then input, and then enter a character. So what this is gonna do, and let me actually go ahead and print it out. So let's go ahead and run and debug.
Yeah, in that input character, just put a colon and space
Yeah,
so that
colon
it's very clear
the
to
design.
Yeah. My bad.
colon and space, so it will be easy.
Yeah. Let's rerun it then. Okay, so let's say that the person just can't read or something, and they can't read that it's a character, so they enter a string instead. It says, I can't read. So it's gonna print out I can't read. So like, we wanted only I in this case, because we wanted the first one. Or, well, that would be obvious, the most obvious thing is to take the first character and just store that into C. So how do we do that? How do you think we can do that?
This is actually a new topic we didn't go over,
Yeah.
but it's called indexing. So if you want to access a certain part of a string, which means a certain character of a string, the notation for that actually is the variable and in square brackets, the number which represents the position which we want to access. So in this case, we do something like C and square brackets, some number. So how do you think we would actually do in this case?
It's an idea. You don't have to just guess much.
Yeah.
But anyway, what you could do is, and I just wanted to specify also that Arnesh said that you can index, but indexes always start at 0 in programming. So this is going to be I can't read, which is the entire string. The first character is going to be 0, and then the space also counts as a character, so 1, and so on and so forth, towards the end. So if I wanted to access I, what's the index going to be? It's 0.
0.
Yeah.
0, yeah.
So I think it's called like zero basic numbering or something like that. Yeah. So what we can do, there's a couple of ways. I'll do it in 2 ways. First thing we can do is we can just say character equals.
And what is the format? So the variable name and what comes after that? Does anyone know?
Square brackets.
Yeah, square brackets. And the number inside that specifies the position, right? So what is the number we should put in here?
C of 0.
Yeah, C is 0. So let's actually try switching this to print C1.
Okay. And this is just one way, there's another way we'll go over. So enter a character, again, I'll just say something. And it's just gonna do I this time because it's in C1. But again, just like last time, I don't want to create a new variable. It's like memory issues, right? Like I want to save up my memory, and I don't want to make my code unnecessarily long. So there's another way. You can go ahead and just stick this thing up here and save. Enter a character.
Oh, you actually forgot. So C.
Oh, sorry.
didn't get that.
My bad. Yeah. So yeah, C1 was deleted. That's fine. And it still stores I, but this time much better because we don't create a new variable C1, and we have only 2 lines of code, but this is only 1 line, not 2 lines, to store just 1 character. So if you think about, like, for example, Facebook or something, and they want you to store only 1 character, and the user just wants to type more, they can type more, but the first character is only what's going to be considered. So it's safe for memory-wise.
So if this might sound confusing, you can do this another way. You could just do C. So you could just say in this case, C and in square brackets 0 in the print statement itself. So if this might not be readable, you can just get rid of this bracket 0, and you can just put in self in the print statement. So this might be more readable, but it's still essentially the same way. It's going to output the same thing. So if I do I am, you see it's going to output the same thing. So you can do it any way you like. I usually do it this way, But anyway, the way he showed it, the way I did it, it's still gonna output the same thing. So it's up to you which method you want to use if you want to index it to the first character.
The reason why I did it the other way was because of the fact that like it's easier to like just have a number up here and like you can like even create like a variable and put it there or like just change it easily.
Yeah, so basically like a character is a string, like in the system everything inputs like a string. So you can put a string here, like I am, and how it stores in the string, you can like you can put that C of 0 is A, sorry I, C of
Oh, do you want me to write that
Yeah,
out?
yeah, that
Sure,
way
sure.
they can explain, they can understand it easily.
Okay, so yeah, I should have done that, my bad. So we can just do like, for example, my I am cool. And then what you can do is the first thing is going to be 0. The next thing is going to be 1, which is a space. And then A is 2, M is 3, space is 4, C is 5, O is, the first O is 6, the second O is 7, the last one is 8.
Yeah, so basically it's like this.
Oh, you want to do something?
Basically C of
Square bracket है
0.
that is how that is the
So this will be I. So it's a string, right? I. So C of
Oh, you want that? Okay.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah, we can do it that way too.
equal to, this is like a space, C of,
We should make the string short.
no, I'm just
Yeah.
explaining, so this is how it is stored, like, whenever you say I am cool, so it stores, in the system it's like that, it's an array of characters. So it's like, okay, like, basically it is a memory location in the system, so each memory is like different. So string, it uses set of bytes, so each byte, like it goes like I in certain bytes, the space goes to certain bytes, like it's like that. System is always like a 0 to 1. So, but it's a memory, it's like a bytes, bits and bytes, you know that. So it stores individual characters actually. But how it stores? It stores like another array. So it links like one character to other character. This is the series of the location. Like if you look at the memory, it's a continuous location. It allocates the memory continuously for a string.
I like how you said because we'll go over lists later on.
Yeah,
And
but it's an array. Character is an array.
Yeah.
String.
You can think of, yeah, and this is going to have zero-based numbering for when we get into lists as well. So just remember the zero-based numbering idea. And even in other programming languages as well.
So just to review, do you guys remember what the exact definition of a string was? If you guys remember. Huh? Yeah, or I would usually think of it like an ordered sequence of characters, right? I used to say letters, but that might not always be the case because you can also have spaces, right? So a more accurate way you could say is ordered sequences of characters because you have characters making up a string. So that's just one thing I also want to make sure.
Yep. Okay. Any questions? There's another like a little like fun thing that I wanted to do. So let's do it real quick. So let's say that I had a variable result, and I set that equal to input enter something. So again, I'm just doing this for fun. So if I do this, let's say that the user wanted to type a math expression because they're doing math homework. So they just do like 2 plus 3. Nothing happens here, and even if we printed out result, what would be the output? Just 2 plus 3, right? Not the result, but just 2 plus 3. So what you can do, if you want this to be evaluated and print out 5, is just do something called eval, and like that, and then you can do print result, and this is going to be nice. So if you want to debug, 2 plus 3, 5. So if we didn't have eval around it, it would just be print out 2 plus 3, but if we have as a string, and if we have eval around it, it's going to evaluate it, and it's going to print out the result. So if I do something more complicated as well, so like for example, 3.4 times 3.5 plus 1 minus 1. That. So yeah, I don't know what it was. So it's just this. Anyway, any questions about this? This is not like necessary. It's just for fun.
I'm not sure. Do you explain like what is eval, what is input? Like it's a system functions. Like it's a
Eval is just like a
No,
function.
it's a function. So it's a predefined functions in the library or a framework.
Yeah.
So I don't know because they're aware of that. What is that? Because you are doing the eval and import.
Oh, okay.
So where it is coming? Because that is like a little later in this course you will learn how to write a function.
Yeah.
So these are all functions like
Yeah.
Which are called-
yeah. So that you will learn later. So you're calling use it because you don't need to write the code multiple times to
Correct.
do some job.
Correct.
So you can write a
Call it
functions and you can call that.
So you wanted me to expand on like what a
Yeah.
function
But
is?
the eval is an inbuilt function here, right?
Eval is an inbuilt function.
Yes.
Well, I was gonna do that like later with
Yeah, yeah,
functions,
that's-
but yeah, it's in. Yeah, he explained it quite well.
Also, we're going to go later in this course about functions, but we can actually create our own functions. So
We'll do that later.
Yeah, we'll do that later though.
That's like towards the end.
Right.
Yeah. Any questions? Okay, that's pretty much it for the introduction. He's gonna go over for loops now, so you can go for loops.
Oh, you mean conditions?
Yeah, conditions and then while loop.
Okay, so if you remember from last week, a condition is something that allows programs to make decisions, right? So if you think about it in real life, right? If the weather is raining, I want to play inside. Or if the weather is not raining, then I can go and play outside. So similarly, you can make a program make decisions, right? So let me just let me get rid of all of this. Everyone has this down, right? All right, so let me name this. Let me just get rid of this. So conditions, we have 3 statements we have. So does anyone remember what the three condition statements were?
If
Yeah, if, and what was the other one?
else.
Else?
If else, if else.
Yeah, if, else, and else if. But in Python, else if is shortened for elif. So let me just write that down. So if, elif, and else. So these are the 3 main conditions we're looking at for in terms of conditions, right? We have these 3 statements we can use. So let me actually create a program that is going to determine if a number is less than 8. So we can review this. Might be a similar example from last week. So but let's make it more interactive, right? We don't want to store a variable. We can actually make it more interactive by prompting user to input a number, right? So we would do number. So number equals int, which means they have to type in an integer. So int, input, and enter your number, which essentially means user types in a number and stores it in a variable called number. So now let me go over the conditions. So if I wanted to check if a number is less than 8, how would I format it in this case? Does anyone know? Yeah, if first we start off with if. That's the first condition we always start off with. Now what comes after this if?
If number is less than
Less than 8.
8,
Yeah?
do this.
Yeah, so kind of like that. So number is less than 8. But the one thing I want to emphasize, and this is really important about Python, is the indentation. That's like a very important thing you need to know about Python. So when I give this colon, and you hit enter, you see it's going to give us the space. That's very important. If you don't have this indentation, we're going to get an error. So if number is less than 8, then I'm going to print out. And what is the term for this? So what type of expression is this? And the hint is it's one of the primitive types. So true or false? Do you remember what that was called? Boolean, right?
Boolean.
So this is called a Boolean expression. So Boolean expressions are, you can find these expressions in math, right? But the only 2 possible values are if it's true or false, right? So if this Boolean expression is true, which we'll see, then it's going to run this condition. So now let's finish this print statement and let's say the number is less than 8. So now let me just say, now let me go to elif. So elif, the number is, let me just say for example less than 6. Let's actually make it different. Let's actually say greater than or equal to 8. So this is like basically opposite of this. So elif, the number is greater than or equal to 8, which means if this condition isn't true, it's going to check the elif. So basically the thing about if and if or else is if the if is true, then it's not going to check the elif or else. The elif and the else is only going to be checked if the if isn't true. So if this isn't true, it's going to check the elif. So now let me go straight to formatting. So what do I need to actually add here?
A colon.
Yeah, colon, and hit enter. So what could you type in this case? So print what?
The number is greater.
Number is not less.
Or you could just say greater than equal to 8. That is another way you can say it. So in this case, print the number is greater than or equal to 8. And let me just represent the else. So let me just say else something like, I don't know. It's just something random. So let me just say I don't know. If the program doesn't know, then it's just going to print out this, right? So if these conditions aren't true, it's going to go for the else.
But,
And, yeah.
but they will always be true though, because like
Yeah.
8 less than 8 and then greater than 8 and equal to 8, so the else is actually never going to evaluate anything.
Yeah.
So
It's just
so
a-
you can change this to like greater than and make that.
Yeah,
So then-
I'm just gonna demonstrate like the how you actually format it. So if the first condition isn't true, you go for the else. The thing about if and elif is, for if and elif, you have to have a Boolean expression after that. For else, you don't. You don't need a Boolean. You don't have a Boolean expression after else. So let's actually try to run this, and let me type in a number like, for example, 10, right? So if I type 10, what is going to be the output? Yeah, so if I enter 10, it should have this output. Now, if I change this to, for example, let me just say 0, then what do you think the output is going to be?
The number is less than.
Yeah, so if I type 0, less than 8. But the thing about this is that when you mentioned earlier, we don't actually need this else because it's either going to be these two possible conditions. So let me get rid of this else. But we can actually shorten this because the only possible condition left is if the number is greater than or equal to 8. So what can I do? What do you think is I can do to get rid of this elif number is greater than or equal to 8?
Replace it with else.
Yeah, so else. So now if I do else, and if I run and debug this, so now if I type in a number like 10, should output the number is greater than or equal to 8. Let's try another test case. And you guys can test out, you all can test out your test cases anytime you want. So let me just say 4, and it should have the correct output. So that's basically what conditions are. The only three main ones are if, elif, and else. So now we're going to jump straight ahead to loops.
Can I do an example?
Oh yeah, you can do an example.
There's like a nice example that I wanted to cover that we cover a whole lot, and it's like with grades. So using conditionals, by the way. So if I have, so let me actually delete this number. So in a traditional classroom, 90 to 100 is an A, 80 to 90 is a B, and then 70 to 80 is a C, 60 to 70 is a D, and then below that would be an F. So let's just keep that in mind and build a program that based on the grade the user or the student gets, it's gonna, or based on the percentage that a student gets, it's gonna output the grade.
Wait, actually, one thing, we actually did this last week, but we can go over it again to make sure that we really understand how conditions actually work.
So since we did it last week, can you build it on your own first, and then we'll
Yeah,
go over it?
and then we can go over it.
You already did it?
Yes.
Oh, all right. Yeah. You can open your program.
It's more complex because it has
D plus. That's pretty.
Yeah, that's all right. Oh.
You don't really need that.
Yeah, you don't need that many. You can just keep it simple, but you can do this if you want. Actually, you just wait to expand on.
timed out waiting for launchers.
Okay, that's kind of strange. Let's try to do this. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it works. Yeah, I don't know. It sometimes just happens that way. Yeah, it's fine. All right.
So if first of all, we need to input the percentage. So percentage.
All right, after this example, we're going to take a 15-minute break. So this
Yeah.
is what point out.
And let's just ask the user to input it because we already learned user input. Enter a percent. And I'm just going to restrict it to ints because I don't want to complicate stuff. So I'm just going to restrict it to ints.
Don't forget colon space.
All right. Right. Okay. There you go. Then, if you want me to continue, I'm just waiting for a minute for it. Others. So if percentage is greater than or equal to 90, print A, and then elif percentage is greater than or equal to 80. Print Let's just be mean to the student and say anything below 80 is an F. Wait, you have a question?
After we put the first one, we continue on to a certain grade, like 80s.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think I understood your question correct. You just keep doing elif.
Elif, yeah.
And then
you
you
end
define
at else for the remaining condition that stops. Oh, what's that?
Like,
Wait. Alright.
alright,
Yeah.
okay. else, print F. Quite hard.
Of course, you don't want it to be this hard, so
But it is what it is.
yeah.
Okay. Run and debug. Enter percent, so 34% F. Which makes sense. And then if I have enter a percentage and they get like a 95, we got an A. And then let's just do B because we have B as well. So if they do like an 83. Okay, 83. If you don't have any questions, we can continue a break.
Of course, you can add more conditions for C, D. You can just make it as short and marked as this. But of course, there's many ways to do one thing. So,
Yeah.
so we
good?
all good.
I'm gonna stop right here.
So we're gonna carry on with loops, reviewing loops after this 15-minute break.
ನಾನು ಪ್ಲಸ್ ಮೇಲ್ಗಡೆ ಇದೆ ಸೊ ಬರೀ ಕಮೆಂಟ್ ಇದಿಷ್ಟು ವಿಡಿಯೋ ಮಾಡಿ ಹಾಕು ಓ ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು ಹಾಕಿ ಮಾಡಿಸಿರೋ
Okay, I hope everyone had a nice break. We're gonna go into loops, and the first one is while, and the second one is for. There's no specific reason we're doing it in this order. It's just because I've learned the while first, and then for, because while is like easier a little bit. And so yeah, that's fine. So any questions on like the previous stuff before we get started? Right. Okay. So what is a loop? First of all, he probably covered it in the last session, but a loop is basically a way to repeat code. And if you have like, for example, a print statement and you want to print hello 5 times, you can do it. Okay, let's not do 5 because that's easy. Let's do like 10 times, right? Print hello. You can do this, and I want to do it 10 times. So I can go ahead and copy. And I can do this 10 times, and so on, right? But I really don't want to do that because it's just so tedious, and I can use a loop. A loop is, that's the whole point of a loop, is to repeat code. And so while loop can be used to repeat code. So if I wanted to print hello 10 times, I can use a while loop. And let me create a variable first, and n is the number of times that you want it to run, or you want it to print hello. And I'll actually use user input, and I'll say input. How many?
Wait, does anyone recall what while true does?
It just makes an infinite loop.
Yeah, infinite loop, right? We want to actually avoid that here. So first he's doing that.
How many times do you want to print? Let's keep how many times you want to print. Okay. And then let's not think about while true loops because they're just ways, they're errors basically. Think about them as logic errors where you don't want them to happen because then it's going to lead to bad things such as your computer eventually crashing after like a long time. Most IDEs will protect that though, and they won't let that happen. But if you were like in the 1900s, it would happen, and that would be expensive. So let's not think about that. Okay. So while, and then n is our variable. So n is less than or equal to. Actually, I'll do something else. While n is greater than 0 or equal to 0. Actually, we'll just do greater than 0. I was just thinking about how many times. While n is greater than 0, we'll just go ahead and print hello. And then n equals n minus 1. Now, I was about to do n minus minus, but the problem with that is that you can't do that in Python. You can do it in other programming languages like C++ and Java, of course in C++ because it literally has it in the name. But here you just can't do that because it just won't work. So hopefully this will work. I think it should work. So let's see. How many times? I'll start with like 2, just to keep it simple. Oh.
Yeah, 8.
My bad. Okay.
In
Casting.
just to make it visible
So the reason why we had an error earlier is because it was stored as a string, and then you can't really do -1 with the string. Doesn't make sense. So that's why it's an error. It works. It's just hello, hello. Now, some people do this. You don't have to do this, but another way to do this is basically to create another variable and change that because it's called like loss of data, and you don't want to lose data. What I mean by that is, but when you store something in n, and then you use this while loop, you're changing the value of n, and at the end of the program, n is always going to be 0, no matter what. And so. Well, not no matter what. If it was negative, it won't even go through the while loop. But if it starts at like 10, 9, 8, it's gonna eventually become 0. And we don't even know what n was originally. We just lose that data. It's loss of data. And so what we can do is we can create another variable that has the value of n. That way we don't lose the original value of n. So again, it's optional. I'll just cover it. Why not? C equals n. So C gets the value of n, and then I'll just do C is greater than 0. I'll replace all of this with C. And it should do the same stuff, but just a little better. Okay. Any questions on this? Okay, I wanted to go into like a little bit more. Before we go into like 2 examples that will really start like applying the concepts we've learned, I wanted to go over a nested while loop. Does anyone know what a nested while loop is?
having a condition inside while.
Close. It's just a loop inside of a loop, basically. It's nested. Yeah. A condition inside of a loop is also something we'll go over in like when we do examples, but that's not called nested. Nested while loop. So if I have, let me go over an example real quick and delete all of this. So let's see. What I want to do is think of an example. Okay, I'll just do this. So I'll create two variables. I, I'll start that at 1. J, I'll start that at 1. And then what I'll do is I'll create a while loop and I'll say while I is less than or equal to 5. And then print. Okay, let's not do that. While I is less than or equal to 5, that's the first loop. Inside of that, since it's a nested loop, we have another loop. So it's another loop. While. And then this time we'll do j is less than or equal to 5. And then what we can do is, this is up to you, but what I will do is I will essentially just print out I. I'm just making up this example, so what we can do then is just do j equals j minus 1, and then that's going to go through the internal one, and then once we go to the internal one, we'll go to the external one, and then do I equals I minus 1.
Do you mean j equals j plus 1 because it's supposed to work
Right, sorry. Both of these are supposed to be plus. I would have been infinite. Okay. That is what our code looks like. So can you just think about what's gonna happen here? Like explain what's gonna happen here. Should we wait?
Infinitely.
Like, I think they're-
Why did it go 3 minutes? No. Because we did this.
We'll wait for them to finish.
Step by step.
So we went over this again, correct? Sorry, about to solve it. Yeah, that's good. Do the same thing going forward. Just give the same example. Yeah. But do like the same, like algorithm. Yeah, what's that?
Should you also print
Say that again, sorry.
after the
Yeah. You want me to print J? Maybe. I mean, yeah, technically it would work. But like, what would happen here is J is gonna have a value of 5, right? It's gonna have a value of 5 at the end of the day. And so like, it's not gonna really do anything. It's just gonna print it out again. So like, no point. But you can do it, sure. But I won't do it right now. Okay, so that's fine. It's just gonna, so it's gonna go like +1, +1, +1. It's gonna have 5, and it's gonna exit the internal one, and then it's gonna print out 5, and then it's gonna go to the next one. So it's just gonna be like 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 1, 1, 1, and then it's gonna print out 5, and then 2, 2, 2, 2, 5, and so on and so forth. So anyone have an idea what's gonna happen with this? Want to explain? Okay. So
I ran it and then it gave me 1, 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
okay, yeah, that's good. So let's go through step by step though. So I starts at 1, while I is less than or equal to 5. Is 1 less than 5? Yes. Less than or equal to 5? Yes. J, and then we go inside, while J is less than or equal to 5, which it is, because J is 1. What's it going to print out? As he said, it's going to print out 5. J will be, there'll be 1 added to J, so now J goes from 1 to 2, and then it goes back and it prints out it prints out I again, which is still going to be equal to 1. Yeah. And it just keeps on going like that until it exits, and then it goes and adds 1 to I. I don't want to keep talking, so I'm going to actually run the code. Probably better. So it has printed out 1, 1, 1, I think 5 times. Yeah, it has printed out 1 5 times. Yeah, that makes sense, because the reason why is because J is going to end at 5. This is what we were talking about earlier. J is going to end at 5, and every time it goes up here, or J is going to end at 6. Every time it goes up here, it's not even going to go through this next while loop, because it's going to be 6, and that's not less than or equal to 5. And then it's going to print out, it's going to go back, it's going to add 1, and keep on going. So this is all that's going to be outputted. Does that make sense? I don't think that made sense. let's do it. Let's go through it again. I is 1, while I is less than or equal to 5, which it is. And while J is less than or equal to 5, so immediately it goes into the next while loop. J is equal to 1, which is less than or equal to 5, and it's going to print out 1, because that's what I is. And it's going to go to 2, come back up here, because 2 is less than or equal to 5, print out 1 again. 3, 4, 5, print it one more time. 6 is not less than or equal to 5. Go back up here, down here, add 1 to I, so I becomes 2. 2 is less than or equal to 5. But remember, J is now 6. 6 is not less than or equal to 5. And so it's just going to skip all of this stuff and go and add 1. So I from 2 becomes 3. 6 is not less than or equal to 5. And then it becomes 4. And then 5. And then it ends. That's basically what happens. That's why it's 5 ones. That makes sense? Okay. Yeah, this is just a kind of a weird example I made up off the top of my head. That's why it wasn't that good. But it's nice to just see how this works. Yeah, that's the nested while loop idea. Do you have any questions? Example time. I'm gonna write out a prompt on the screen and as a comment, and then I want you to write code for it, and then someone can, like, whoever's brave can come up and like do it on the computer if that's fine.
I as 1. And the J print J so he's checking.
Should I go back to the screen because they're talking about it?
They call it a counter.
Should I go back?
So you're printing the value of I J times.
Yeah.
It says my account.
Okay. So J first one like ಮತ್ತೆ add
Google account.
So
Yeah.
It said
until it becomes 5, this number works. Okay.
Wait,
Once it
that's
becomes
strange.
6,
yeah, so
this condition is
so
false,
then I
right?
changed my
It
password.
will come out
Yeah.
of the loop.
Just to double check.
And then I becomes 2.
Yeah, so you could probably change that, right?
Then it will go back here. Okay. You know,
Yeah.
he has to do some.
You're just saying some suspicious.
Yeah, just
So 5 times it will print out, right?
Do you want me to repeat it or something? I can repeat it.
Okay.
Should I repeat it? I'll repeat it. It would be better if we had like a whiteboard, but like that's fine.
I know.
Yeah.
You've already changed
So
Wait, did you change your
5
password? What's your password?
inside loop inside ಈಚೆಗೆ ಬರುತ್ತೆ until it becomes 5, it prints 5 times. ಮತ್ತೆ ಏನು ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ ನಾನು ಐನ ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಆ್ಯಡ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. So I became 2. Even though it comes here and checks, this condition is true, but J has already become 5. I mean 6. So ಅದೇನೋ ಅರ್ಥ ಆಗಲ್ಲ. Actually ಏನು ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಇಲ್ಲಿಗೆ ಬಂದಾಗ ಐಗೆ I have to reset the counter as well. Then 2 will be printed 5 times. 3 will be printed 5
Oh,
times.
because you're trying to access
ಇವಾಗ ಏನಾಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆ I is 1, J is 1 ಇದ್ದಾಗ ಮಾತ್ರ print.
Yeah, I mean, you don't need to use
Because the J counter is already
usually you could just use like
6.
this for visual
ಅಲ್ವಾ? So
But
once
roughly
it
it's
comes
not
here,
already
I became 2,
That would probably stick
but
with
J
this
is already
or,
6. So this whole thing doesn't run on me. It will go back and it just keeps adding.
Yeah.
But ಅವನೇನೋ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಆಕ್ಷನ್ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿಲ್ಲ. So if you want to do some action, ಎಲ್ಲಿ
Yeah, I mean, you're doing it with your laptop, right? Yeah, I mean, it should be a big deal, right? Because you don't
I ಅಷ್ಟೇ I ಏನು ಸ್ಟ್ರಿಂಗ್ ಇಲ್ವಲ್ಲ.
you can probably
Quotation marks
because it's not like some other stranger trying to log into your account. Oh,
ನಂದು ಯಾರು ಗೊತ್ತಾಗ The rhythm is there.
You could just do it on a normal Chrome tab. Oh, like it's all
Yeah.
ಬಂತಲ್ಲ ನನಗೆ.
Oh.
Yeah, 5 times. ನನ್ನದು ಬಂತಲ್ಲ.
Yeah.
ಹಳೇದು
Yeah,
ಅದು
you're
ಡಿಲೀಟ್
good.
ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಬಿಡಿ.
Yeah, sorry.
Alright, I'll re-explain it just because it's kind of a weird example. So,
ಒಂದೇ ಸತಿ print ಆಗಿದೆ. ನೀವು ಹೆಸರು print ಮಾಡಿ.
I, oh yeah, let's waste the time.
ಆಮೇಲೆ 111
ಅದು ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತಾಗಿಪ್ಪ
ಬಟ್ ಏನು ಗೊತ್ತಾ ಇದೆ ದಟ್ ಶುಡ್ ಬಿ ಡಿಫರೆಂಟ್ ಫುಲ್ ತಗೊಂಡಿದ್ದಲ್ಲ ಫ್ರೀನೆಸ್ ತಗೊಂಡಿದೆ
Should I start now with this? Should I start now? Okay, so I starts at 1, J starts at 1, and so what we do is we go to this first while loop, and we check the condition. Since I is 1, which is less than or equal to 5, that's true, it's going to go inside. And it's going to go to the first thing that's after that, which is this another while loop, which is nested inside of the first one. And J contains the value 1 at this point, which is less than or equal to 5. And it's going to print out the value for I, which happens to be 1. And then J, which happens to be 1 still, it hasn't changed. Now it's going to change, it's become 2. And 2 is less than or equal to 5, and so it's going to print out 1 again. And then it becomes 3, 1 again, 4, 1 again, 5, 1 again, and then 6. That's not true. So it's going to exit this whole thing and go to the next thing. Right? And then I from 1 becomes 2, and then it goes back up here, which is less than or equal to 5. That's true. But J, remember, is now 6, not 1 anymore, but 6, because we set it up here, and we're not going back up there, so we're just going to get the value that was before 6. And then 6 is not less than or equal to 5, it's greater than 5. So it won't even go in here, and it's just going to go and add 1 to I, which is now going to become 3, which is less than or equal to 5. It's going to skip this because 6 is not less than or equal to 5, and then go back up until, keep adding 1 until I becomes 6. At that point, it's not less than or equal to 5, and the program ends. If you want me to print out what I and J are going to be at the end, we can do that. That might help actually. So print out I and print out J. Yeah. So. Okay. So as we said before, J ends up becoming 6 at this point. And then I ends up becoming 6 after this, and so they're both 6 at the end. Does that make a little bit more sense? Okay. We'll send this code via GitHub later on, so you can analyze it more if you want. Okay. Time for the example, Dale.
Do you all have GitHub accounts, or
Yeah.
no? Alright, yeah. So you guys, you all can create it, and you can basically access all the code.
You don't even need to create it to access it. You
Yeah,
can still access it.
You could if you want. If you want to end up making your own projects, you can also upload it on GitHub. But it's up to you. So
Yeah.
the main website is GitHub, and you can access all the code.
Okay, I'm gonna type out the examples and you can work on them on your own. And then we'll help you afterwards. So this is a way to do a multi-line comment. Example
The value of I and J at the end.
1.
He is adding them to tell you that every time.
Sine of A RX I is
We actually did this example, but
this one?
yeah, we
Should I
did.
do the next one?
Yeah, you could try doing the next one. Because you all have these programs saved,
Maybe we
right?
can just do this one again.
Yeah, you can attempt it again this
ಒಂದು
time.
ಆಗ್ತಾಯಿಲ್ಲ ಅದು.
Fine.
ಇದು ಇದಕ್ಕೆ ನೋಡಿ ಇದು ಫುಲ್ ಫ್ರೀನೆಸ್ ಆಗಿದೆ ಸಿಗಲ್ಲ ಅದನ್ನ ಎಂಡಿಂಗ್ ಮಾಡೋದು ನಿಮ್ದಿಲ್ಲ ಎಂಡ ನನ್ನ ಎಂಡೇ ಅಂತ ಹೌದಾ ನಂಗೆ ಅದನ್ನು ಹೊಯ್ತಾರೆ ತಗೊಳ್ತಾರೆ But how do you end one while loop? Oh, now I got it. No, that's not in here with me.
Okay. So the San Jose Sharks is a made-up team, I think. Started the game with what's the real team? Okay. They started the game with 0 points. They have scored a total of 6 points by the end of the game. Used a while loop to print the scores throughout by increasing by 1 each time. So you can increase by 2 and 3, but we chose to increase it by 1 each time, and then we can print it out, I guess. So yeah, it says print out. So yeah, go ahead. We'll work on it. As you work on it, I'm going to type out the example too as well, so just ignore what I'm typing.
Point equal to 0 in the beginning.
Did we do this one?
No.
We did not. That's perfect. That's perfect. Okay. Lighting? That's a crime. It's a crime for us.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Wait, also, do you guys remember the operator that calculates the remainder? If you remember, what was it called? Yeah, percentage sign. So that's also a key thing. A hint is that you can do modulo 5 equals 0, which essentially means 5 can go into that 0.
Grab some pen.
Yeah, 5 can go into 0 without any remainder. Yeah, we use modulo. That's what it's called, the modulo operator.
I think these are good examples because they incorporate all the ideas we learned, and they're pretty good. So, yeah.
Yes.
If you have questions, you can ask.
Yeah.
Should I not do example one, like write the code for it? I would just send it over to GitHub for some time purposes.
Yeah.
Because like it's already 4, like we have only 1 hour. And we have a lot more, so I'll just do 1 or do 2.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah.
ಮೊದಲಿನ ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮ್ ಇದನ್ನು ಹ್ಯಾಂಗ್ ಅಟ್ಯಾಚ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದು ನೋಡ್ತಾರೆ.
Yeah.
So why is your not
Everyone they just a while loop for
why Rocky are all going to be positive? You haven't asked them.
First one is
You haven't asked this.
first
I
one
did.
is
What did you say?
ನಾ ಕ್ವೆಶ್ಚನ್ ಬರ್ಕೊಂತಾರ ಲೇಟ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ
No, I think I don't know. That's a curious thing.
ಆಮೇಲೆ
Curious.
ಬರ್ಕೊಂಡು
Yeah.
ಮೇಕಪ್
I'm curious.
He's mod. Are you mod?
start
But
now.
then what do you answer?
If I think example 1 was covered, and I think we'll just have it on GitHub and send it to everyone. So I'm not gonna do example 1 due to time concerns. But for example, because we have like 2 more concepts to cover that is new, so I want to like spend time on that. So we'll just not do this one. But you guys, if you're working on it, that's fine. That's good. We'll not do this one as a like working it out on the screen. But we'll do example 2. Because it's new. And example 2 is basically a little bit more like mathematically oriented. It's just a program that calculates the amount of numbers between 9 and 69 that are divisible by 5. And just try to guess what numbers are going to be. 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, all the way to 65. And those are the numbers that are going to be divisible by 5. And so those numbers should be counted. I don't know how many they're going to be, but we'll figure out when we write our program. I'm going to delete this stuff right now, if that's fine. Should I delete it? Or do you still want it? Keep it. Okay, I'll just keep it. Sure, okay, we'll keep. I'll delete example 1 though, because we already have that. And it's basically printing 1 to 6. That's essentially what, or 0 to 6, that's essentially what's happening with this one. It's very simple. We've actually covered this kind of, so. Okay. So, all right, let's start. So I'm gonna create a variable called num, or num is usually used as a short form for number in programming, and we'll set that equal to 9. So that's the first number. And then while num is, the reason why I'm doing this I'll explain after I do it. Num is less than or equal to 69, do stuff. The reason why we're doing this, and of course I have to increment. So num equals num plus 1. And then inside here goes all our code. But the reason why I'm doing it in this structure is we're starting at 9, which is what we are saying, between 9 and 69. And we're just gonna keep on going until num becomes 69. And at that point, we don't want to check anymore because we're only going between 9 and 69. So that's why it's like this. If I didn't do this, if I did num equals num minus 1, that's again the infinite loop thing that we get into, which is kind of a problem. So we're not going to do that. This is going to work great if we do it this way. And any questions on why it's like this format? If not, we will get started. So basically what we want to do is you want to count the number of numbers that are divisible by 5 between 9 and 69. And that number that is going to track how many there are is going to be C. We'll call that C, or count. We'll just do count. And initially it's of course 0 because there's nothing there. And then inside of this we'll change count. So he covered previously conditionals, so we're going to be using that now. If, what do you think I should add? No. If no.
And what do we have after that?
Percent sign.
Yes.
5 equals 0.
That's right. And then after that is going to be.
And not is percentage, okay.
Oh, it's fine. It's just count equals count plus 1. We're just incrementing count. And earlier, I think you mentioned that you wanted if inside of a while. This is an example where there's an if inside of a while. It's not. I guess you could say it's a nested if statement, but not really nested because an if inside of an if would be a nested if statement. It's just interesting. So num starts at 9, and num is less than or equal to 69, so it keeps on going and going. And if num mod 5 is equal to 0, which means that if num is 10 mod 5, 10 divided by 5 is 2, but the remainder is 0, and so 0 equals 0. Count is going to add 1 because it has to add 1, because that's literally like what we're doing in this program. num, and then we keep on going until 69. So then after all of this, we're gonna go out of the while loop and print out C, or count. And that's gonna tell us how many there are. And save.
No, he has to put on the.
Apparently there are 12. Maybe let's check that. 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 55, 60, and 65. That's right, that's 12. Any questions? Alright, so that's pretty much it with this example and with while loops, really. There's another thing I wanted to introduce, but I think we're going to introduce it later, which is like the break and the continue. And so we'll just do that later. We'll cover it.
All right.
Who's going to do what? For loops now.
All right, so now we're going to go over for loops. So a for loop, recall, is, does anyone remember what a for loop is? Yeah?
You can decide how many times something iterates.
Yeah, so you can iterate something a specific amount of times. So let's actually figure out, does anyone remember the format?
Or I in range.
Yeah, so for I in range, I can be any random variable. It doesn't matter what variable you have, but I usually use for I. So let me just go quickly over the format. The first thing I want to demonstrate is printing out hello world 10 times. So similar how he went over while, we're going to do something similar here. So let me just go give a few new lines. Now say if I want to print out hello world, I'm just going to simplify it to 5. So if I did print hello world, right? And if I want to print out 5 times, so I would need to keep copying and pasting this, right? But we don't want that. It's going to get pretty repetitive. And to avoid that, we can actually use a for loop too. So the format to this is, let me just get rid of these 2 lines. All we need to do is have this print hello world. But before this, we have for I in range. So for I in range, which means in this range of some number, I want to print out something or a statement this many times. So for I in range, so if I wanted to do 10, I could do 10. So the thing about this is, if you're gonna get a red line because I need to have this indent. So let me just hit tab. So this essentially means I want to print out hello world 10 times in this case. So to see the output, let's run and debug. So Control S, run debug. So here we should hopefully see 10 outputs hello world 10 times. So if you count this, it should be 10. 1, 2, 3, 4. But if you do the count, it should be 10 in this case. So the thing about for loop is we don't actually need to specify this one number, right? So does anyone remember the format? Besides this, we can add some more numbers with commas. Does anyone remember like the specific format? Yeah?
So it would be like the starting number would be 0, or like whatever number you want to start with.
Yeah?
And then it would be the ending number, and the number you want to like increment by.
Yeah. So the thing about this is the start number is by default 0, right? So, but this is an end range. If you specify only one number, this is the end range. But the end, not end range, end number. So the end number is actually exclusive. So it's not going to be stopping at 10. It's going to be stopping at 9, right? So 0 through 9, if you do the counting, it's going to be 10 times, right? So to actually see that, instead of printing hello world, and this should be a review from last week, so print I, let's actually run this and see that it's going to print out, okay, let's actually look from the start. So it's initially starting at 0, right? If you scroll all the way down, it's stopping at 9. So this basically means 10 times, right? So let's actually start to use what should I say? Let's actually make it, instead of just end numbers, I can just specify a start number. So let me just say 2 in this case. So I'm starting at 2. It's going to end at 9 in this case. So let me actually just print I in this case so you can see what the number is. So let me print I. Does anyone know what the output of this is going to be? Yeah?
2 to 10.
Yeah, so until 9, right? 2 and it goes until 9. So let me hit save, and to test that out, let's actually see. So here is, so here we have our output 2 all the way till 9. So we can actually add in more numbers, but by default start number is 0, and by default it's going to increment by 1. But say I want to increment by 2, right? If you don't want to increment something by 1, say if you want to increment by 2. So what do you think the change will be in this case? Leo?
You add comma and then put 2.
Yeah, so comma 2 in this for loop, in the range. So let me go to range. Now let me specify 2. So essentially start at 2, which is inclusive. N number is going to be 9, right? Because as I said before, it's exclusive. And here's our steps. We can increment by 2 each time. So to test that out, let's actually run. And see, we should get to, so let's see, 2, 4, 6, 8. And it's not going to include 10. So here we should see the output is 2, 4, 6, 8. So this should hopefully be a review from last week. But does anyone have any questions? No? All right, so now we're going to go to a little bit more of the nested for loop. So just like how we have nested while loop, right? We went over that. When we had a while loop inside of a while loop, we can also do that with for loops in this case. So let me actually, so basically for loop inside of for loop. Let me get rid of this example. And similarly to how we showed it, right? We have I equals 1 or j equals 1, but we don't actually need to create a variable, right? Because when you use a for loop, we can specify the number to start at 1, right? For while loop though, we have to also specify like what the start number should be and how much it should go till and how much it should increment, right? But by default, it's going to increment by 1 in a for loop. So let's do a similar example. Let me say for I in range. So he had 1, so let me just specify the start number 1. And if I want to go till 5, what should I do in this case? For the end number? 6, yeah. Because this is exclusive, so it's going to stop at 5 and not 6. So similarly in the format of how he demonstrated, so we have for loop, now we can also have another for loop. So let me just name this variable as j, and let me do the same thing. So for j in range of 6, it's going to go from 1 to 5 in both of these loops. So the term for this is, the first for loop is called the outer loop, and then the for loop inside of this for loop is called the inner loop. So that's kind of the terminology we use when we're looking at nested for loops and programming in general. So now, what if I wanted to print out I in this case? So let's try to see. Oh yeah. So similar to how he did it, if I print I, and let's actually see and run what the output is going to be. So let's see. So it should hopefully output something. Oh yeah, let me comment this out. Yeah?
I have an unexpected error of parsing.
Parsing? Oh, do you mind looking at it? For y in range, your code is here. 111 for n in range 111. And you're printing out some of those two numbers. So you're first doing this, right? And you're doing I equals 10. So 1 is 1. That means 2. And you're incrementing n, right? So 2, 3, 4. This makes sense, right? And once this inner loop is finished, it's going to go back to the outer loop, that's to say, and increment it by 1. So now it's 2. But this starts over, the inner loop starts over at 1. So 2 plus 1 is 3, right? You do the same thing, and so on until the for loop, the outer loop, has finished. So let's see, for y in range. Wait, why did it say 1, 6? Oh wait. Oh yeah, because you're supposed to specify a statement here. That's what you actually say. But when you have a for loop, you have to make sure you actually specify the statement. Otherwise, you're going to get an error. So let's try running this again. Now it should work. So you should see that that's the output. So let's go back. Okay, let me run the debug and see. All right, so we see this huge output. Let's actually go through it step by step. So, okay. So just disregard this 12. We're starting at 1, right? So we start off at 1. And let me actually comment this out because this might get confusing. Let me comment this out for now. And let's only look at the output we have. So highlight multiple these lines, do control / to make multiple lines of comments, multiple lines in our code into comments. And that's a quick shortcut you can use. So now let me rerun this. So rerun it and see the output. Now it will be more clear. So let us look from the beginning. So first it starts off at 1, right? let's look at our code and see what's happening. So for I in a range of 1, which means it starts at 1, once it starts at 1, it goes in this inner loop. Then it keeps iterating j, right? Remember how I said j keeps incrementing? We don't need to say j equals j plus 1 because that's by default going to increment in a for loop. So j is j plus 1. How many times will j go till? So 1 through 5, right? So that means 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is 5 times, right? So we're printing out I, which is staying at 1. We're only incrementing j. So let's see. It should output 1 5 times, right? So let's count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is the value of I. So now it ends at the inner loop. So inner loop means this. Now it's going to go back to the outer loop. So it's going to increment this 1 to 2, and it's going to do the same thing. So once the outer loop increments to 2, it's going to go in the inner loop, and it basically go through this whole loop. So j restarts at 1, right? So j goes from 1 through 5 again. So which means it goes 5 times, right? So it's going to print out 2 5 times. So let's look here. It might be confusing at first, but as you do more examples, you really start to understand how the nested for loops work. So looks like I closed it. So here we see 2 after this first 5 lines. We have 1 1 1. We have 2 2 2 2 similarly, and this is 5 times. So if we start to see the pattern here, we see each number from 1 through 5 is going to be printed out 5 times. So that's the thing. For loops can be confusing at first, especially when you look at this for loop. At first, you would probably think it's simple, but this is kind of like an additional step that you need to take. But the thing about this is you can also print out a grid. So say if you want to print out a grid of hashtags, right? And depending on what the users type, right? You can print out a grid with 5 by 5, for example. If I type in 5, we can print out a grid 5 by 5. So that's kind of a useful use of using a nested for loop. So similar to nested while loop, you can also use it in this format. So now let's look at a few examples. So this example from last time, we'll actually use the same example. Oh yeah, before we move on, does anyone have any questions?
Can you explain what the error he had? So that for the benefit of everybody,
Oh, yeah.
Can you explain the?
Oh yeah, so the error he actually had is he forgot to specify this print I, right? But when you get rid of this, you're gonna get an error. Because anytime you create a for loop or a condition, you need to actually specify the statement. So let's try running this without any statement inside this loop, and let's see what the error is going to be. So if it does, if I run in debug, this will give us an error. Seems the output is taking a while. But let me try rerunning. Yeah, so here we see it expected an indented block. So the thing about this is we actually need to make sure we specify a statement. So I have no statement here in my for loop, and that's why we're getting this error. So that's the important thing here, right? We need to specify a statement no matter what. So that's the important thing. But if you get the idea of how for loop is formatted and the statement you need to include inside the for loop, then you'll start to understand more through more of the examples we're covering. How exactly we can use for loops, and how exactly we can also use nested for loops on top of this. So let's actually use an example. Does anyone have any questions before we move
So
on?
we can give an example, like everybody uses Excel. So Excel has 2 columns. Now, how do you read the column? Like for loop, you can read 1 by 1 value. But if you want to read, there are 2 columns in Excel. One is like a name and the second one is age. So now you want to read both. So how do you read? So it is like a multi-dimensional array. That's what we call. If it is a single value, it's 1 column, it is single value.
Yeah.
And if we have 2 columns, it's called a multi-dimensional array. If you want to read, you need to specify, okay, I want to read from column, row and column. So you should specify J or A of 0 and comma 1. That means you are specifying a particular cell. So like that, you can read 1 by 1 cell. You can read the name, you can read the age, you can read the name, you can read the age, like that.
Yeah.
So you need to keep incrementing the row. And columns will be 0 or 1. But for example, in Excel sheet you have 10 rows. How do you read 10 rows? The outer loop will be 10 times. That is a row. So you need to read 10 times, so I will be 10, then 1 to 10, so that means every time when you increment, you'll be going from one row to next row. The other one is a column, the J is a column, whatever it shows it, it's a column. So that will be 1 or 2 maximum, because you have only 2 columns. So it is 0 or 1, 0, 1, 0, 1. So you will be keep incrementing 1, that's the first row. J will be 0 or 1, so you will be reading name or age. Then you will be incrementing the I, that will go to the next row. Then you are reading 0 or 1, name or age, then you will increment I. So third row, fourth row, like that. So that's where like here is.
So that's a good explanation. He'll also like set up like a grid, like he said, using asterisks, and that way you can like analyze like the index numbers.
Yeah. So we'll actually do a second example covering that. The first example will start off simple, right? How can we use a for loop? So our first example is going to be similar to what we use for the while loop, right? So we have this make a program, so calculates numbers between 9 and 69, divisible by 5. So I want you guys to try out this example, except using a for loop this time. So if you guys need any help, you can raise your hand. So let me actually I'm just going to specify this for loop.
Because if the row and column like the same number, that will be confusing. Like
Yeah. Ready? Alright, yeah. So because time issues, I'm going to write out the solution to this problem. So for this one, you don't need to create a variable. You don't get this. Huh? Okay, yeah.
You left it right in.
Alright, so here's the solution, right? So similarly to how we had the while loop, we first create a variable count, initialize it at 0. Essentially this count is going to keep track of the amount of numbers between 9 and 69 that are divisible by 5, right? So we have this for loop, which means we're in this range of from start number 9 to actually, since it's exclusive, I have to change this to 70. So it's going to be from 9 to 69, right? And if the number, so I is going to be from 9 to 69. So if that certain number modulo 5 equals 0, which essentially means if it is divisible by 5, then if it is divisible by 5, we increment this count variable by 1. So hopefully we should see the output to be similarly like for a while loop example.
I think it's 12.
So it should be 12, yeah. So if I run and debug, you should see the output 12. So here is the answer. So does anyone have any questions? No?
Go over the asterisk example.
Oh yeah, asterisk, all right.
Or the table.
Table, yeah. So this is going to be our next example. So basically what we're going to do is prompt user to input some number, right? And depending on that number, we're going to create a grid of asterisk, a number by that number. So in this case, if I enter 5, it's going to create a grid of asterisk 5 by 5, right? So that's this example I'm going to be presenting up. In this case, we're going to use a for loop.
It's just like the Excel sheet example.
Yeah, the Excel sheet, as you mentioned earlier, the rows and columns. So let me just write out the example real fast. So multi-line comment, create a grid n by n. N meaning the user input. So you can work on this example, but I'll just type it out for time's sake. So let's see, and I'm just gonna make it clear what this variable's purpose is. So I'm just gonna say num equals int input.
Let them here, type it out.
ಅದೇ ಬಂದ್ಬಿಡ್ತಾರೆ.
You have to explain it.
Yeah, I'm just gonna wait a few minutes.
Make sure to explain it.
Yeah. So we're just gonna around 2 more minutes, or 1 more minute, and then I'll explain this. With this.
Square, right?
Huh?
It's a grid, right?
Yeah, square of
Because
asterisk.
that might be confusing, the variable columns and rows might be a better idea, so that they know.
Oh, you want to do like separate ones?
Yes,
Separate.
Just do like rows, separate columns, separate.
Separate columns?
Yeah.
So it will be easy to explain
Yeah,
also,
that's
then what is the difference?
Yeah.
Separate columns meaning?
Like
You can say row and columns.
Oh, okay.
Like
So
rows equals input something.
input, okay.
ಜೆ ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಜೆ
Also like
ಎರಡು
Yeah, yeah.
There's a little bit of change in the instructions. Like we're not doing the box anymore, but now like a rectangular shape. So it's not too much of a difference. It's just a little bit.
Because otherwise it will be confusing, like both place num.
Yeah.
ಇವಾಗ ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಚೇಂಜ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಸರ್.
I named it wrong. Yeah, all right.
Make sure to specify like what the goal is. All these, because I think rows are like the rows that one down.
You.
So rows vertical. Say it out loud. Say it out loud.
So rows meaning like how many times you have from top to bottom. So if you have 4, it's going to be 4 down. 3 columns mean from left to right. So we have 3 columns from left to right. So that's basically another way we can also make this. We can also specify the amount of rows you want and the amount of columns you want. So using this, we can actually use the input for both of these. But the new concept here actually is the n. So what does n exactly mean? So if you have this n, you have the print something you want to print, n equals something. N basically means how do you want to end that statement, right? So by default, if you just have print something, it's going to print that out and give a new line. So if you actually want to have two print statements, but both of those print statements you want to have it in the same line, that's where we can use n equals this. Which means the first statement we can specify how we want it to end. We can just end it with nothing at all, so empty string. But if you just have print, it's going to give you no line, and it's going to print that. So let's put that into use.
Make sure to like write that down because it's kind of important.
Yeah, it's an important thing, especially for the grid. If you miss out the and equals, then we're gonna get some weird output. So let me get.
If you miss out the end equals, it's just gonna be like all on the same line.
Yeah. So.
Or like all on different lines.
Different lines. So let me specify 3. See here, it's gonna be kind of weird, right? That's where we need n equals this. So let's start off with how we can actually use n equals, right? So. The thing about Python is, let me just compare. So for Java, you have print and println, which means if you learn println basically means give a new line after outputting something. Print means you basically print out something but don't give a new line. But the default in Python is you print out something and give a new line. So if you want to print out something and don't give a new line, that's where this and equals comes in. So let me just let me comment this out actually and demonstrate the concept. So let's do print hello world, right? If I did hello, comma, if I did print world, right? What do you think the output is going to be in this case?
It's just hello world.
Yeah, hello world. But the important thing I want to emphasize is going to print out hello, give it a new line, which means give a new line and then print out world. So let's see what the output is. So run and debug. So let's see the output. Oh yeah, so here we see hello, comma, give a new space, give a new line, and then world. But what if I wanted to put all of these in the same line in these two print statements? Well, that's where n equals quotation marks comes in. So now let's actually add that. So if you think of this, it can be like kind of like we can pass in multiple numbers in a for loop. We can also do something similar for a print. So it's not just one thing, we can also specify another thing, which means how do we want to end this print statement. So let me just say hello, give a comma, and now let me say n equals this, which means how do I want to end the statement? So it prints out hello, n equals this, which means don't do anything, don't give me a new line. It just stops at that point, and then it prints out world. So let's actually see the output now, and now let's run and debug. So we should see hello world all on the same line. So that's kind of the new concept here. N equals basically means how do you want to end that? Default is gives a new line, but if you don't want to give a new line, you only want it in the same line, then it's very important that you have this n equals this. And that's also used for our grid example in this case. We're not going to give a new, so we have this, right? We have the row, and then it gives a new line, and then it has those multiple asterisks, gives a new line. But in this case, you can think of it like, well, how much do you want in a row? You don't want to output something, give a new line. We want all of them in the same row, and then we give a new line. So it'll make more sense. We could send a solution to our GitHub, through GitHub, and because of time's sake, we're going to move on to our next concept. But before I move on, does anyone have any questions? No? All right. So now we're going to go to our new concept. This new concept, no, lists. Yeah. Our next concept is we're going to cover lists, and then we're going to move on to functions. So let me comment this out. So what exactly is a list? A list, you could think of it like a real life, right? If you have a to-do list, which means a list of things you need to do, right? We can also have a shopping list, which means, oh, we have these multiple items we want to buy. We can also represent that in Python. So the thing about a list is basically, in terms of Python, it's a collection of data items. So a collection of data items that we can store in one variable. So you might want to think, if you have a shopping list, you can create a variable, name it something like shopping list. We create a list and store something like bananas, apples, oranges, any item you want in your shopping list. So the thing about lists, and it's pretty intuitive, is that you can have various primitive types. So if you think about arrays, you can only store one primitive type in that. But the thing about lists is you don't only need to store ints. You can also have a combination of ints, strings, floats, and that's what makes it pretty flexible. You can store any primitive type in your list. So the format is just like how we create a variable. We can create a variable, something like shopping list. So let me actually do that. So let me create a variable shopping list. The notation for that is square brackets. So we have a pair of open and closed square brackets. And inside those square brackets, we can specify our data items we want to include in that list. So in this case, if I have a shopping list, right, what do I need to buy from the store? Well, I could say apples, bananas, and oranges. So let me actually say that, apples, and the thing about this is commas separate our data items. So this counts as one data item. Anything after this comma, so let me just indicate it out. We have two different data items here. Apples is our first data item. Oranges is our second data item. But notice how I said, we don't need to just store strings. We can also have integers. But it wouldn't make sense for a shopping list since we would use words to specify what we need to buy. But to make it more understandable how lists are flexible, we don't need to just store one data type, or primitive type. We can also store numbers like 4, 4.5. So you can also do this, and that's what makes the list so flexible. You can have a collection of data items, and you can just simply store that all in one variable. So let me actually get rid of 4.4, 4.5. If you want to add more data items, you can do that. I'll just say bananas. So this is kind of like a shopping list. List in Python. We can store a collection of these items, so apples, oranges, bananas, store that in a variable called shopping list. So now, if I want to print out this list, what do you think we need to do?
Print shopping list.
Yeah, so print shopping list, but we don't use quotation marks, because if you use quotation marks, it's explicitly going to type out shopping list. So if you do shopping list, it's going to print out the value. So the value in this case is whatever is on the right side here. So apples, oranges, bananas. So let me actually type this out. Shopping list. And let me save, and let me run and debug. So here, we see our output is apples, oranges, and bananas. So that's basically a list. List is pretty organized if you have some similarity between different data items. So if I want a shopping list, a list of items, I can actually have them organized and store them all in one variable. So that's what makes lists so powerful. You can have an organized collection of similar data items that have similarities between them. So now, let me introduce a few functions. So the first function I'm going to be going over is append. What append basically is, it adds an item to the end of the list, right? So the way this works is we have the variable name, dot append, and in parentheses, the data item I want to add. So you might be thinking, I don't need to just do append, right? I could just add it simply to the list. But you can actually prompt user to input something, and whatever the user inputted, you can use dot append to add that whatever they specified to the end of the list. So let's actually put this into play, and let me say extra items. So say it's not just these things I need to buy. Say I want to also buy milk, right? So if I wanted to add milk, then I can do shopping list, which means the name of the variable, dot append. So what is dot? Basically means in simple terms, is if you want to have access to a function. So append is a function you can access. So say, if I wanted to use dot append, I can append something to the end of a list. So if I want to append milk, what I would do here is dot append, and in parentheses, milk. So let me just add that. So this is the format to adding to the end of a list. So it's going to be, what is the output going to be in this case? If I do print shopping list?
It'll just also add.
Yeah, so, yeah, so basically apples, oranges, bananas, milk. So let's test that out and run it. So we should hopefully see the output is apples, oranges, bananas, milk. So does anyone have any questions so far? No? Alright, so let's move on. And of course you might say, why would I want to use .append when I can simply add this milk to the end of the list myself? But the thing about this is if you want to, so let's actually introduce user input, and whatever the user enters, let's add that to the end of the list. So let's do a similar thing. Add extra shopping item. Now you can name variables any way you want. I'm just making it super specific that, oh, you have to enter some item and we're gonna add it to the list. So now let's do that. So add extra shopping item, and let's do equals input, and by default they type in a string. So what extra item do you want on your shopping list? I'm just gonna say, what is your extra item to keep it short? So what is your extra item? And now, whatever they type, store in this variable. So if I wanted to add whatever the user typed to the end of the list, what do you think I should do in that case? Yeah?
You have to append the shopping list with whatever.
Yeah, so the format recall is the name of the variable, which means the list in this case. So in this case, I would do the name of the variable shopping list dot append, which means what do I want to append, or simpler terms, what do I want to add to the end of the list? So append whatever the user typed. So extra shopping item. So now if you run this, and if I want to say, if I wanted to enter something else like strawberries, right? If I type in strawberries, we should hopefully see it's going to add strawberries to the end of the list. And that's why it can be useful to use append, is to make it more interactive, and whatever the user can enter, it adds it to the end of the list. So does anyone have questions so far?
Wait, what do you find shopping list by append? I didn't see it.
Oh yeah, sorry. So this is the format. Name variable dot append whatever data item you want to add. So in this case, whatever the user entered. And let me actually specify in the comments, so it might be useful to understand. So name, I'm just going to say name variable dot append. I'm just going to say data item. Data item means this, like the apples, oranges, separated by commas. So is that more clear?
Yeah.
All right. So now we go over append. Let's actually go over another method we can, another function we can go over is insert. So say if I want to insert some item at a specific, oh yeah, one thing I want to say is indexing starts at 0. So if you want to access the first data item, what do I want to do in this case? Let me actually get rid of this. So let's keep it simple. Now if I want to access apples, what do you think we need to do? It's similar to indexing into a string, where we can take the first character of that string. It similarly works the same way here. So does anyone remember the format?
The brackets.
Yeah, brackets. So we have the variable, square brackets, and in this case, if you want to print out the first data item, you start our index at 0. That's something that you need to know in terms of programming. Most of the things you start index at 0. If you want to print out the first data item, we have the name of the variable, square bracket 0. So now let's see that and run debug. So should hopefully print out apples, because this means the first data item. Now say if I type out a number like out of this range, right? Let's say for example 10. And let me run this. So let's see what's going to happen. We see we're going to get an error, which means list index out of range. The reason for that is because we have an index, but the item in that index doesn't even exist, right? Since our index only goes from 0, 1, 2. So that's also one thing I want to point out, is be careful of counting your index. So apples is index 0, oranges is index 1, and bananas is index 2.
So you can give a challenge like out of that, out of print A.
Yeah, out of range.
No, out of print A in that.
Print A? Oh yeah.
First apple A. So that's the challenge.
Yeah, that's
How
the challenge.
they-
The thing about that is kind of like it's a 2D list, a little bit more complicated. It's kind of like you can have, let's think, columns. You can have different, how do I say it? So rows and columns in terms of list. So the way we actually index into that is we have 2 pairs of square brackets. So this essentially means the number we have here is the row, which means the data item. The column, in this case, is what part of that data item I want to access. So if I want to access the first, right, first data item, the first brackets, what should I say in this case? 0, right? So if I say 0 here, right, and if I want to access the first character, we can actually do something similar here. So another pair of square brackets, and I have this A, right? What do I need to do in order to get that A? 0, right? So if I say 0, let me rerun it. So if I run and debug, you should hopefully see A. Yes, see here is A. So that's an additional thing. We can also, if you have a data item, we want to index into a specific data item, which means the first data item, we can also do something like this. Oh wait, so 2 pairs of square brackets, 0, 0. Now say if I wanted to print out the second character of the, second character of the second data item. So what do you think we would do in that case?
1, 1.
Yeah, 1, 1. So let's say shopping list 1, 1. The output should be R. So let's save this and let's run in debug. So here we see R. So that's kind of the extra thing. It's good to know about this if you want to access it to a specific data item. But that was the main challenge if you want to that he brought up. So now let's go into our next function. So the next function I'm going to be doing is insert. So if you want to insert a specific data item at a certain index. So this is a little bit more complicated than append. Append simply adds to end of the list. Insert just adds at a specific index. So if I want to add between apples and oranges, right? If I want to add between apples and oranges, then I would do something like similar format to append. We have to name the variable dot insert, which means I want to insert some data item in a specific position, such that when I add this data item, the item is going to be at this specific index. So in this case, if I wanted to add, let's think. So if I want to add kiwi in this case, if I want to add a kiwi between apples and oranges, right? Our first thing we need to specify in this insert is our index. But let's focus on that a little bit after focusing on the specific data item, right? So after the second comma, let's say kiwi, because that's the data item I want to add between apples and oranges. So we actually need to specify another number here. What do you think is the number I need to specify here? 1. Yeah, 1, right? So if I do specify 1, we should see hopefully apples, kiwi, oranges, banana. Let me make this kiwis, because all of these are plural. Let me run in debug. So we should hopefully see the output as, so once it runs, for some reason I have to keep hitting this twice, but, oh wait. Oh yeah, my bad. Yeah. All right, so I forgot this, so we have to make sure we do print shopping list. But now, if we have that, then we should hopefully see it. So here we see apples, kiwis, oranges, bananas. So that's another method you can also understand. It's a little bit more complicated than append, but if you want to be specific at what position I want to add this data item, then that's where insert comes in. So did everyone catch up here? All right, so any questions? No? All right, so now if you want to remove a data item, right? Let's now go over the pop method. There's two things, two functions. One is pop, the other is remove. So let me go over them one by one. What basically pop is it pops or removes whatever is at the certain index, right? So if I want to pop or remove the data item at this index, then I would do something like pop, and in parentheses 0, if I want to remove the data item at this specific index, right? So if I want to remove apples, let me actually do this. So shopping list insert, let me keep this available here. And let me actually put in parentheses, in a comment, what the output is going to be here. So apples, kiwis, oranges, bananas, which is basically a list. So here is what it looks like. But now, if I wanted to remove the data item. So say if I want to remove oranges, right? So say, oh, I already have a lot of oranges in my house. I want to remove that from my shopping list. Now what should I do in this case if I want to remove oranges? So using the pop, which means what index I want to remove. So it's similar to this format. We need to specify our variable dot pop. But what is the number I should use in this case? Actually think about it again. So pop basically removes the data item at this specific index, right? But what index is oranges at?
2.
So, huh?
2.
2, yes, so 2, because 0, 1, 2. So that is the number I need to specify here, right? Now, let me do this. So shopping list, similar format to our insert. We do the name of the variable dot, which means access this function. So dot pop or remove at the certain index. So now if I did shopping list dot pop 2, then we should see apples, kiwis, bananas. So let me save this. And all right, so yeah, here we see the output, apples, kiwis, bananas. These are quite a bit of functions, but if you put note of it, then you'll start to understand what these functions can do. So the last function I'm going to be going over is remove. So similar to we have the pop, we also have the remove. The remove is kind of different. In this case, we won't be specifying an index, we'd be specifying the item we want to actually remove. But the thing about remove is it removes the first occurrence of that item in the list. So say if I had duplicates, right? You can, the thing about this, you can also have duplicates in a list. So say, now you probably won't have apples twice in your shopping list, but I'm gonna do it in the case to explain this concept of remove. So if I have 2 apples, if I want to remove the first apples, then there is where we use dot remove. So remove apples, which means I want to remove this specific data item from this list. So now if I run this, so it should hopefully be apples, oranges. Actually, let me just get rid of this statement. So let me get rid of this insert so you can start to see. So if I remove apples, it's going to remove the first occurrence of apples. So we should hopefully see apples, oranges, and bananas. So now let me run and debug this. And now we should hopefully see apples, oranges, bananas. The main takeaway here is to understand what a list is exactly. A list, to summarize, is a collection of related data items. It's flexible in that we can use strings, we can use ints. It's not specific to one data item. So if I want to specify, let's see, the price, right? If I want to just say $12, now this is kind of hard to tell which number is associated with which. But if I say apples, probably won't be $12. I would say 5. So apples, $5. Oranges, I would say, I don't know, 4. You can make up these numbers, but it's only to understand how you can use strings and ints all in one list. So if I say bananas are probably 6, this works because a list is not just open to only one data type. We can have a combination of primitive types. So you can even add true in this case. So apples, true, 5. All the primitive types we can have inside a single list. So does anyone have any questions about this? No? All right, so let's go over an example. The example is basically going to be creating a list of numbers. And what we have to do in this case is print out the average of all those numbers in the list. So oh yeah, all right, so we'll actually leave this to later. I think because of time's sake, we're gonna move on to our new topic. But I'm probably gonna be sending this set of practice problems that you can attempt on your own time. So let's move on to functions.
We can do that at the end maybe if we have time.
Yeah, if you have time.
Okay, so that's a lot of lists. This is a new concept, so it's good that he took some time to cover it. Now we're gonna go over another new concept, which is, as discussed earlier, functions, which we promised to do. And let me delete all of this stuff. And
You can actually comment it out.
okay, fine. But actually, I think we should delete it because it's more organized. That way.
Yeah.
You can create a new file.
New file, actually I feel like you can do that.
Alright, that's fine. Okay. So okay, so now we're going to cover functions. This is a new idea. Basically, think about functions as tools in your toolbox. Basically, a way to use functions is it's a set of like instructions that you can refer to, that you can call repeatedly in your program, and you have access to in order to perform a certain action. That's kind of like not detailed, but I wanted to start with a not detailed explanation and move into a more specific example as we do specific explanation as we do an example. So let's get started with an example. Let's say that I wanted to create a function that adds two numbers. So so basically what I can do is I can obviously add two numbers like we've been doing all this time, like doing this. N equals 4, and then M equals 2, and then we can just print N plus M. This is easy, right? But what if I don't want to specify this throughout my code? Say I'm like adding numbers all the time in my code, like 500 different times. I don't want to specify N plus M each and every time. I can just call a function each and every time I add the numbers and just write it once. And the reason why I'm doing this is, say for example I forget, I accidentally do a minus instead of a plus here. And I forget that it was supposed to be a plus. Now imagine that I have this 500 times in my code. I have to change it 500 times to a plus. Instead of doing that, if I had just one function at the top where it's just N plus M or N minus M, and then I could just fix it there to make it a plus, and then it just automatically fixes it all at every point. So that's kind of the reason why they use functions. We'll make that explanation more solid with this example here. So let's create a function to add two numbers. So the way you do this is important to know. Basically, the way you do this is you start with def, and that essentially is defining our function. Def is stands for like defining, so defining our function. After that, you specify the name of the function. What do you think the name is going to be here? Well, we can just do add, because that's what we're doing, so it's add. And typically, we would avoid using a keyword for our name. Like, for example, don't do like print, for example, because then that's confusing. Don't do that. So just do like something else like n, m, add, subtract, multiply, factorial, etc. And then what you do is you have a set of parentheses, and inside of these parentheses you can specify what the parameters are going to be. Now this word parameters is probably new to you. It's basically what you're going to be sending into the function, and in this case, since we're adding two numbers, how many parameters are there going to be? Just two, yeah, just two. So 2 parameters for the first number and the second number. So we can just call them num1 and num2. And they're separated by a comma, just like with lists earlier. And then what you do is you have a colon, enter. And remember again, Python is nice because the way it like essentially determines if our program is within a function or not is with this indentation, and it forces you to have proper indentation. In other programming languages, like Java for example, they use brackets, curly brackets, or braces, and that's just not good because some people like have random indentation and it still works, but it's like for other programmers it's annoying to like fix their code if there's errors. So that's it. And then what you can do is you can print out num1 plus num2. So I don't need all of this here. I literally don't need any of this. What I can just do is I can call the add and enter in 2 numbers, 34, 35. Sounds good. Did not see.
No, you're looking at the wrong one. Yeah, sorry.
Let's see. Okay,
Yeah.
that's good. All right, so that's the sum. We just add, so let me explain once again. add is the function, and we're calling that function. We're passing in two values. Those values have a special name. They're called arguments. So the values we pass in, so I should specify values passed into a function are called arguments. Those are called arguments. And then the values that are taken in, actually let me separate that, let me add that into the new line. And the values that are taken in by the function, these are called parameters. Any questions? Okay. And then so what happens is we're going into the function add, passing in 34 and 35 to num1 and num2 respectively. And those values are going to be stored into those two variables. They're like copied into those two variables. And then we're printing num1 plus num2. So it's as simple as that. Similarly, let's create like all the different operations to subtract, multiplication, and division. I'd encourage you to do that first. So just do that, and then I'll do it on the screen.
All right, one thing I want to specify is you can think of parameters as placeholders, as something that's temporary, but the arguments you're passing in values. So you're basically substituting those arguments into the placeholders. So it's going to replace this placeholder or parameter with 34, and replace this parameter or slash placeholder with 35, and it's going to print out basically substitution is what's happening here.
Yeah.
That's the main thing that I would define when we're talking about functions.
Yeah, just go ahead and start with the subtraction, multiplication, and division functions. You can just do subtraction actually, we don't have to do all of them. So. I'll just continue. I can wait for one. Okay, so let's do it now. Make sure not to just start defining your function right here, like right here, because that's not gonna do it. You have to like define a separate function, so it has to be outside. There, for example. So define subtract, and then num1, num2. They can be called the same thing. That's fine, because they're separate functions. Okay, and then we just print num1 plus num. And so the reason why they're not like highlighted here is because I haven't used it yet, and I just like it's just a parameter, but I haven't used it. But once I use it, it's gonna change to being brighter, or num2. Yeah, just like that.
There's a mistake. It's num1 minus.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
my bad. My bad. Okay, num1 minus num2. And then of course we can call it just like this, subtract 35, 34. And of course the order does matter, because if I switch the order, it would be the negative. So it would be like -1 if I did 34 and 35. And yeah, that's just gonna save. So first one happens to be 69, which is the print, not this one, add 34 and 35. And it's so nice because like you can read it out, add 34, 35. That's literally what it does, adding 34 and 35, subtract 35, 34. So make sure that you name your functions accordingly, that they make sense to another programmer, what they mean or what they do. Some people, like, I'm not gonna do this, but what they do is like they add a comment on top of each function, specifying what it does. So here, like, this function is used to subtract, or I can just say subtraction function. And this is not necessary in this example, it's super easy, but it's good practice, good practice. So any questions on this stuff so far? Alright, so there are functions, you can also create a function that has no parameters. So, I mean, we can cover it, but it's not like entirely different at all. All that we have to do is just remove these parameters. And so, for example, like a function could be just printing something out, like printing happy birthday. So like, define the function, it's my birthday. So what this function can do is gonna just do literally print happy birthday. So we obviously don't have this anymore. And we have no arguments because we're not passing in anything. We can just go ahead and pass and call it's my birthday. That's it. And what should happen is it should just print out happy birthday. Oh, sorry, not me. Okay. And this avoids like writing out print happy birthday like 500 times in your code if that happens to be the situation. You can just define a function that prints it out for you. That's like, so what I've been doing so far is like simple examples. Let's move into like a complicated example because that's when you learn more. So let's do a factorial. So what is factorial, you might ask? Factorial is basically like a way to like it's essentially a mathematical operation where you're going to take the number that you pass in, so for example, and you're gonna, the output is gonna be 4 times n minus 1, which is gonna be 3 times n minus 2, which is gonna be 2 times n minus 3, which is gonna be 1. So 4 times 3 times 2 times 1 is gonna be the output. Does that make sense? Okay. Makes sense? So can you start writing the function factorial? I think it's not as hard to program it, but it's more hard to like actually write the logic. So this is more like logic heavy. It could take a while, so just try your best to set it up. And I'll give you a hint that you could use a while loop for it.
Or for loop.
Yeah, but I used a while loop, so just use a while loop. I'll just like get started, but you can ignore the screen. Yeah, that's not. Okay, get this out of the screen. So. Sure, it works. It worked. Who needs more time? Oh. Okay, I'll get started. If you're working, you can continue to work, but I'll just explain what I did. Your code might be a little different, that's fine, but this is what I did. So I have a function definition, so I'm defining the function factorial, and literally the hard part of writing this function is the logic. So if you're good at math or you're good at like logical thinking, this is an easy problem. But if you're not so good at it, like you're not quick at it, you can just try to think about it, honestly. That's the best thing to do, just think about it. So we're defining the function called factorial. That's the name of the function. And the input parameter is going to be a number num. And so the reason this line exists, the existence of this line comes from the fact that I don't want to change the parameter. You can obviously, you don't have to do this, you can change num. But it's just kind of a practice that I've learned when I first started programming. So I just create another variable just because. And then what I do is after I create that variable, num is not going to be changed because n is going to be changed instead. After that, I have result equals 1. This variable result is going to be the variable that's going to store the result of the factorial. And it's going to constantly change as we move through the while loop. Why do I start it at 1? You'll see when we go through the while loop. While n is greater than 0, so if the user passes in 3 and 3 is greater than 0, result is going to be equal to result times n. Originally result is 1, and result equals result, which is 1 times what was n? 3. So it's going to be 3. And then we decrement n by 1, and so it goes down to goes down to 2, because n was equal to num originally, which is 3, and 3 minus 1 is 2. It's going to go up to 2 is greater than 0. So result equals result times, now at this point, it's going to be times 2. And originally, what was the result? The result was 3. So 3 times 2 is what we're going to have, which is 6. And then n, which was 2, is going to go down to 1. 1 is greater than 0. Result equals result times 1, which is 6 times 1 is 6. So that's done. And then n minus 1 is 1 minus 1 is 0. N is greater than 0. Is 0 greater than 0? No, it's not. So it's going to exit the while loop and return result, which happens to be at this point 6. And so that's why 3 factorial is 6. That's the idea behind this function. Any questions on how it works?
So can you put a breakpoint and stop that?
The break?
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
So that you can step through that and you can explain like how it is running.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's a good idea. So, okay, why not just break it after the first? I'll just break it after the first loop right here. And I don't know if we introduce break.
No, we didn't.
Okay, I'll introduce break. Break and continue are keywords that are used within loops, and I guess their function or their purpose is essentially to break out of the loop. So, for example, if I'm going through this loop and I want to go through it once and then I don't want to go through it anymore, I can just break out of it and I can exit out of this loop and move on to the remaining code. So in this case, it's going to go through these 2 lines and then it's going to hit the break, and it's not going to go back and check at all. It's just going to exit to the next line. Does that make sense? Break. Just exiting out of the loop. And continue is similar to this, except it's not the same. It's similar in the sense that it's also used within loops, but continue does the exact opposite. It's not going to break out of the loop. It's going to move on to the beginning again. And so basically, if I have continue instead of break here, I would just go through these lines and then I'd continue. Now here, there's no point because like, we're obviously going to continue. So let me actually change this up. Change this to up here. Here it makes more sense to add the continue because we're never going to reach this line of code. We're just going to go here, result equals result times n, then continue. So we're going to go back up and check again. And in this case, what is it going to be? An infinite loop because 3 is always greater than 0. We're never we're not giving the function a chance to decrement at all because we're continuing on. And so yeah, it's an infinite loop. But that's just to show you the idea. So we're not going to add this continue here. Now let's do the break, just to break down the code. So here's break. And let's run it first. Let's run it before I start.
So I was talking about the break point, not the break.
Break point.
Can you guys start?
Wait, break point.
Step by step.
Oh,
Step by step.
You mean like doing it like
You mean like what is happening?
Yeah.
When the program debug, it stops there.
Oh, you mean that?
And they can see the progress, like how the function is moving. Okay, now you can see that there's a breakpoint. Now exactly you can see how the function is executing. Now when you run this, it will stop here. This is the first breakpoint because it did not it did not execute the definition because you need to make a call to run that function. So from here you are calling the factorial function. Now you can step into that. That is this one, down arrow. Down arrow there.
So this.
Yeah. So if you click on that, now it goes to the function because you are calling that from the print. So now it goes there. Now you can see the value. What is the value of num? You can observe there. Yeah, you can see the value. What is the value of that num? Now that is 4. So now we are getting into that. Now n value is 0 because you are not assigned anything. Now when you cross that line, yes, step. Nothing. Yeah, step. No.
Oh, this one.
Yeah, that's a step. It is a step by step. So now you can see the results, like what is there in each step, what is the value of that. Now you can see the value of the results. Now result is nothing because it's not defined yet. Just see the value of n. If you can, yeah, cursor
This one again.
1 second.
Oh.
So you can see what is the value of n now. So n should be equivalent to num because n and num. So you can see the value it shows here. And the result is nothing because you're not defined yet. Now if you want to go inside, so step inside. Now step in, now you know the value of n is 0. But here n greater than 4, so n is 4 because you assigned it here. And 4, now the results. Result is 4 because you are doing the results 4 into n, so n into 4.
I think it would make more sense to explain it with the
Because you advance once if you're in the previous line, then result was the value of 1, n was the value of 4. So because we have gone to the n equal to n minus 1, the result is already 4.
Yeah, no, but we did not execute that line yet.
We have already. Result equal to result times n is done.
Yeah.
What are the
Result, okay, result is nothing, right? Initially is a 1. 1 into 4 is 4, correct.
That's already
So,
done.
right. Now if you go to the next line, now you're doing n minus 1. Yeah.
I think it's better to just explain it verbally.
No, because n is 4, we are doing n minus 1. The result 4 because we assigned result 1 here. Result is 1 here, so 1 into 4 is 4. That's right. So this is how you understand how the function is executing, how the values are assigned. So you can loop through this. Now the first step is done. Now we can go to the next line. Now it's a break because there is a break statement. It will come out of the function. So it is come out of the function. Now we are in the return statement. So what is the result? Return value of the result is 4. Now it will come out from this. it will go back to your print function and it is printing that value. Now remove this break, then you will see how it is looping there.
Loop.
Yeah. So, yeah, we don't need this break. I just added it because I thought he meant like break. But yeah, so do you understand how the factorial works though? Yeah, if you don't, like, if you have any doubts, you can access this code later as well.
Yeah, because the debugging and all works, it will be very helpful because you are going to some company and somebody has written that code, you don't know what is happening there. So how do you understand what is their code, how it is executed? So this is the only way to understand their program. So you can see what is happening there.
Some people like on tests that I've taken for CS, we just do it like use paper because like we don't have access to computers. And it's like if you just like write
How
out
did
the
you get
values.
that step by step thing?
There is an arrow on the top, like you can see that. One is a step over, step into, step next.
You click on,
Sure.
click on, see a red circle.
Click, yeah. There's a red dot.
How did you insert the red dot?
Yeah, it'll show like when you hover over it, it'll show up in the light.
But it might be
Red circle.
different for like different IDEs though. So
Yeah.
So generally, people will use print statement.
Yep.
That is pretty fast because it prints a value and you can see.
Yeah, you can.
But this is another way to understand for
Yeah.
the beginners like how it is executed.
Yeah,
And I
especially
don't
for
think-
complicated, right?
Yeah, I don't think I told you what return is. Return is basically once you hit this return statement, it's gonna like return the value and it's not gonna like do anything else. It's just out of the function. So like print was different where it just printed and then it can move on with the function if there's anything else. But return is just gonna return a value and we're done. And return, like think about it like a calculator where you do like 3 times 4 and then return, where it's gonna get you the value. So that's returning a result. Now, you don't have to just do return values. You can also do print and returns at the same time. However, if you have a print after this return, those prints are not going to be evaluated because we're out of the function at that point. So that's why. But I can add like print statements up here, like print something, something, something. H, for example. And this would be still evaluated. But I'm not going to do that. So factorial, that makes sense? Okay. There's another example that I wanted to do. It's calculating your BMI, which is like body mass index, I think. And I don't know too much about what the BMI is. I think it's just like to measure like the relationship between your weight and your height, I think. Yeah, and it's like, I want to just give you a challenge. So like write a function that calculates BMI. So just do that.
You just have to do the formula.
Yeah, the formula.
Oh, the formula.
Yeah, you have to do the formula.
I thought you had to do it. Okay. So it's just basically taking kilograms, dividing it by, kilograms is your weight, and then dividing it by your height in meters squared.
Can you write that on the?
Yes. I'm gonna delete this if that's okay. Yeah, I'll just delete it. You can check it on GitHub later on. I want to get rid of the whole thing.
No, I mean like the red circle. Yes, you can get rid of it. Just control C. Or yeah,
I don't know that.
You will take a break for 5 minutes.
Oh, sure, yeah. I'll just write out the
Maybe you
instructions.
can give the
Yeah.
thing and then.
Yeah.
ಈಗ ನೀವು ನೋಡಿದ್ದೀರಲ್ವ ಈ ಮತ್ತೆ ನೆನ್ಸ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇರಲಿಲ್ಲ ಈ ಫೋನ್ ಎಲ್ಲಿ ಬರ್ತು ನೀವು ಕಾಲ್ ಮಾಡೇ ಇಲ್ಲ ಫಂಕ್ಷನ್ ಬರ್ತು ಪ್ರಿಂಟ್ ನೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಲೈನ್
ನನಗೆ ಬಂದಿದೆ ಅದು ಪ್ರಿಂಟ್ ಅಂತ ಗೊತ್ತಾಗ್ತದೆ
ಫ್ರೆಂಡ್ ಕಳಿಸಿದ್ರು
ಅದು ಪ್ರಿಂಟ್ ನನಗೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿ
24 ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಇದು ನೋಡಿ ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಇಲ್ಲಿ 1 ಇರುತ್ತಲ್ವ ನೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಲೂಪಲ್ಲಿ ಅದು ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ ಇಂಪ್ರೂವ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಹೋಗುತ್ತೆ ಪ್ಲಸ್ 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 ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಹೋಗುತ್ತೆ
Okay. Is that clear?
ನೋಡಿ ಇಲ್ಲಿ
For squaring, you can use like a math function, but you don't have to. We haven't got that yet. Just do like times number times number. That's it.
So weight and height, just to clarify, are 2 parameters.
By line.
that you can have in the function.
Yep.
ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ಮಾಡಿ
Did you want an asterisk instead of the?
ಕ್ಲಿಕ್ ಮಾಡಿ
Oh yeah.
No, you divide it by.
ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ ಸರ್
Meter squared. Meter squared.
4 into
Yeah.
4
That's why
But the result is
I don't have to do like the squared program.
ಮತ್ತೆ ಲೋಪ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಬರುತ್ತೆ ಇವಾಗ ಇದು ಎಷ್ಟಿರುತ್ತೆ
But you cannot use that upper the carrot thing on your program. That would be-
Yeah, it's not done.
But we're not gonna.
Yeah, we're not gonna.
403 ಎಷ್ಟು
I think it's the final
12
example.
ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಬರುತ್ತೆ ಇದು n ಅಲ್ಲ 2
This is the final of this one.
ಮತ್ತೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಬರುತ್ತೆ ಇದು 12 ಇದೆಯಾ 12 ಇಂಟು 2
Be writing it out now. It's really easy. It's just basically like division stuff. I just made it easy because like it's the final example for the content, and then we'll do like a example after this, which is a combined example. It's a little bit like it's fun but complicated. So that's like after this. If we don't, I think we'll have time. But if we don't have time to complete it, we'll put it on GitHub. So yeah, let's just get started. So I'm gonna define the function. I'll call it calculate BMI. And I got this example from the organic chemistry tutor because like he had this video on calculating BMI. And okay, so what are the parameters gonna be?
Weight and height.
Yeah, that's right. Weight and height. We're just gonna assume that it's in kilograms and meters respectively because of the fact that it's gonna be overly complicated for no reason if we change it up. So anyway, the purpose of these classes is just to like teach you how to write the code instead of the math. So what you do is you can either print it out or return it, but I'll do return because I feel like it's better. And we can do return. So what do I do now?
Weight by height.
So it's
Weight divided by height.
Yeah, weight divided by height squared. So weight and then divided by we just use a forward slash, and then height times height. Now make sure that you add them in parentheses because if you don't, what's going to happen is it's going to do weight and then it's going to divide height and then it's going to multiply the result by height again, which is obviously incorrect. And so that's just a reminder to you that in Python and in programming languages, it follows PEMDAS, just like in math it would, which is PEMDAS is basically the order of operations. And so it follows that order. Parentheses, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, or other way around. Parentheses, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. That's basically it. Yeah. Any questions?
Enter your weight.
I think I forgot exponents into it. There's exponents as well. Yeah. But it follows that order. So this is how it's going to look. So let's calculate the BMI of something. So calculate BMI. Now the important thing you have to consider is that since this is a return function, you can't just call it and not do anything. Because in that case, it's gonna give out a error. You have to either return or you have to either print a value, store it into something else, or you have to use it in a calculation. Those are the three options. In this case, I'll just print it out. So it's gonna be print calculate BMI and say like 40 kilograms and height in meters. I don't know.
Just give anything.
20?
20.
Is that too
20.
small?
You can use any numbers.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Okay. Alright. Is 20 meters too tall or something?
I wonder.
Apparently the BMI is 0.1. I don't know how. So, okay, I mean, I do know how. 20 times 20 is 400.
Yeah.
40 divided by 400 is 0.1. So that's why. So, I don't even know if that's realistic, but that's the BMI. Any questions? Okay. That's pretty much the conclusion of all the topics that we're going to cover. But now we're going to go into the complicated example, which is going to be essentially taking, wait, what's the example that we were going to do? Oh yeah, chatbot. So we're going to do a chatbot. And I think we'll just give you like 10 second, like 1 minute break in between.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you
You can just like settle in or something.
So chatbot, you're basically talking with the computer, and we're basically gonna break it down into functions. So
I don't think we have too much time.
yeah, we won't have too much time. We're just gonna try to cover as much as we can, and the rest we'll post on GitHub.
I'll write it on GitHub.
Yeah.
So I'll just create the assignment right now, and you can try to write it right now, but you don't have to finish it because there's only like 12 minutes.
What is it? What do you have to do?
But I also define the function, like what you need to create. and
Yeah.
What do you have to do?
Right? Oh. Write a function that acts as a chatbot. I should say a group of functions. And if you don't know what a chatbot is, it's basically like when you go to websites, you might see like a chatbot that pops up where you can ask it questions and it answers the questions automatically. You can write that, but it's going to be way less complicated. Basically, what we're doing is we're going to ask the user what their name is, and if they have a pet or not. And if they do have a pet, then it goes into another function. And if they do have a pet, it's going to print out something like a smiley face. If they don't, it's going to print out a sad face, and we're done. So, yeah. I'll start writing it because I feel like that's best.
But how we can actually expand into this function is if they have a pet, then we can print out the BMI of that pet. So you can actually experiment with this. But yeah, we won't cover that right now. We'll just focus on what was explained right now. It's something for your own time.
What would be the function for that?
Yeah.
Next one.
Okay, ask your name.
Yeah.
Ask if the user has a pet. Print out accordingly. That's the general instructions.
Because they are all inside that function. Okay, now make the function.
Huh?
Two functions, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Two functions.
Actually,
Two functions. Greet and answer.
yeah.
Okay, I'll start writing it because I feel like the instructions are not as clear, but we have less time, so.
Oh, keep explaining? Okay. So, this thing showing up, let's just wait for it to
You're calling BMI.
Here it is. So basically what we're doing first is we have this def view, which means defining a function called greet. We're prompting user to input their name, right? And this is this line, right? After we have that line, we're going to concatenate. So remember, concatenate means join together two strings, right? Or multiple strings. It doesn't just have to be two strings. So you have this hello plus the name variable we had to prompt user print, but plus this question we have here. So do you have a pen? And basically after this, we're calling this function, but now we're defining this function below it. So this function essentially is the answer function basically determines if you have a pet or if you don't have a pet. And we're going to print out the statements accordingly, like if you have a pet, we print out a smiley face. If you don't have a pet, then print out a sad face. So.
Okay, that's the entire function.
The thing about this is, sorry, just scroll down. If you type in something other than nor yes, it's still going to print out sad face. So what I would do here is print out else if answer equals no. Because say if someone, for example, types laptop, it's still going to print out sad face. Doesn't answer the question, right? So I would say else if answer equals no.
Technically, the user can also enter like something like like capital now, and it would just like not do anything.
Yeah.
So that's like a problem we could address with like .lower, but we're not gonna do that.
Yeah.
Because I don't think we introduced that.
You're gonna assume the user types in, huh?
You can also say or, just repeat it over.
Yeah, that's also.
Yeah, you can also do that too.
But
But we're gonna just assume for now the user is gonna type in all lowercase, yes or no. So yeah, you can say that. It's just gonna be.
But like,
pretty
there's
long.
so many different possibilities.
Yeah, there's so many different possibilities. Lowercase and
Yeah,
uppercase.
so I'll just actually keep it just like.
Yeah, but that's why you can use the lower, but we won't go over that because
Yeah.
of time's sake.
So let me just explain real quick again. There's a function greet, and it's gonna ask the user what their name is, and then it's going to essentially print out hello name. Do you have a pet? If they answer whatever the answer is, it's gonna go and it's gonna call the answer function, and it's going to ask the user input what the answer is. If it's yes, it's gonna be a smiley face. No, it's gonna be a sad face, and that's the end. It's a really simple function or group of functions. Again, we made it simpler because of time issues, but if we had more time, this would have been more complicated.
But the thing is, you can also call a function inside a function. So you have a function, you can call another function.
That's what happened here.
Yeah, that's basically what's happening.
We call the function greet, that calls answer, which is here,
Yep.
and then it ends after that.
And do not forget to call the function, otherwise nothing will happen. So you have to make sure you call the function.
Exactly. That's just 7 minutes left. That about ends everything.
We can test too.
Oh yeah.
Just test what is your name. You know? Oh yeah, we can type uppercase. Okay, assume you're gonna type all lowercase. Also, it's kind of poor design. I would say give it space, but it's fine. No,
John Cena does not.
unfortunately,
I think.
But if you type lowercase, yes, it should depend on this. That was the main example. Anyone have any questions? All right, so we can call
Call it a day.
it a day. Yeah. Thank you.
How did you guys like the class?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It's a good beginning.
So if you are interested to continue this, like more advanced topic, please let us know so you can respond back to the workshop at details.org. Then based on your feedback, we'll decide on to continue this session. We can do some advanced program. And I hope you guys enjoyed the session. I welcome Arnesh to do a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Victor. So first of all, Arnesh and Pranav, thank you so much. And the detailed level, the step-by-step how you explained it was very appreciated. I want to thank both of you very much. So good job, good job. And this wouldn't have happened without the support from our TVKS community, because they have come forward to learn, and you guys have provided a good experience for them. And as Victor just mentioned, so this will be something, if they're, depending on the interest, again, I want to reiterate what Victor just mentioned. If you guys are interested to learn more, please don't hesitate, let us know. We will certainly arrange for a follow-up session as required, be it in person, be it on Zoom, whatever the case, because this whole session was done through our youth committee for the benefit of each one of you. It is not just for kids, even for adults. I just want to reiterate that. So it is done for the sake of the community, and we want to thank everybody for this. And this effort would not have been possible without the excellent efforts from our youth committee, youth team who have come up, thought of this idea and put this together. And also I want to thank Anupama, who is not here today with us, but for the background effort, work that has happened to be able to take care of this. And also for all the snacks and everything provided, I want to thank our food committee, Bharti Sriram and team, and also the volunteers who helped. So today I know Pranav has come in to work with Arnesh and support. Last week, Diva was here to support Arnesh. And for those of you who were here last week, How many of you remember the budgies? The snacks that were made? Huh? I want to thank Ashwini Madam for taking the effort and making that. So thank you so much. So I just want to thank, and also for all the facility arrangement, both last week and this week. So we want to thank Sahana Manjunath and Bharti Sriram for taking the time to work on the facilities. Thank you, Sahana. Thank you, Bharti. And last but not the least, we also in the SQL session that we had last week Saturday, a week ago Saturday, that was taught to all of us by Srividya and Divya. So we want to thank them also for their efforts actually. So kudos to each one of you. This is done on behalf of Tri-Valley Kannada Sangha through our volunteers, because every one of us is a volunteer who's putting in all the efforts. I want to thank all of you for this. And Ananta has also just come in from as the lead of the facilities team. There is quite a bit of work that has happened behind the scenes, which nobody gets to see. I want to thank Ananta for taking care of all that. Okay, with that, we'll call a wrap for this session, for this last week and this week's session, for taking care of this. If there's anybody needing anything, please let us know. Before we exit out of this room, let's have a group picture so that we all remember that we are all together in this. Okay? So, for the sake of the photo, I would request all of you to take out your mask just for the split second for getting a photo done. So, I want to thank all of you. Okay?
So if you want SQL also, if you want to learn SQL, please.
Yeah, SQL also, as we did last week, and Srividya has mentioned that she's here to help anything required. If there's a follow-up session, please let us know. Okay? Thank you all very much. Thank you. Appreciate all of your effort.
Thank you.